On the 4th of August 2011, the fatal shooting of Mark Duggan by armed police officers in Tottenham, North London, sparked a wave of riots and civil unrest that quickly spread across the city and beyond. The incident was just one of many cases of police brutality and discrimination against black communities in the UK, and it exposed deep-rooted social and economic inequalities that had been, in many people's opinions, ignored for far too long. The shooting of Mark Duggan and the subsequent riots which took place after the fact were a defining moment in modern British history, and they brought to the fore a number of urgent issues, including the role of the police in society, the nature of race relations in the UK, and the impact of austerity and economic inequalities on marginalised communities. This video aims to provide a detailed and nuanced exploration of the shooting of Mark Duggan, from the events leading up to its aftermath, and the wider implications for British society. We will seek to shed light on the complex web of factors that contributed to this tragic event and its aftermath. Ultimately, this video aims to challenge viewers to think critically about the issues of police violence, racial inequalities, and social justice, and to consider what steps we can take as a society to create a more equitable and just future for all. Mark Duggan was a 29-year-old British man when he was shot dead by police in Tottenham, North London on the 4th of August 2011. The Metropolitan Police stated that officers were attempting to arrest Mr. Duggan on suspicion of planning an attack, and that when he was killed, he was himself in possession of a handgun. Unfortunately, Mr. Duggan had died from a gunshot wound to the chest. The circumstances of Mr. Duggan's death resulted in public protest in Tottenham, which led to conflict with the police and eventually escalated into riots across London and other English cities. Mr. Duggan was, at the time, under investigation by Operation Trident, an anti-crime project conducted by the Metropolitan Police to tackle gun violence in the city. He was aware of the investigation of Trident and had texted the message, "Trident have jammed me," moments before the incident that took his life. Mr. Duggan was known to be in possession of a BBM Brunny Model 92 handgun, a blank firing replica of a Beretta 92 pistol, which was converted to fire live rounds. This gun had been given to him by Kelvin Hutchinson-Foster, and Mr. Duggan had received this gun 15 minutes before he was shot. At an initial trial of Mr. Hutchinson-Foster, or October 2012, the jury had failed to reach a verdict. At a retrial on the 31st of January 2013, Mr. Hutchinson-Foster was convicted of supplying Mr. Duggan with the gun and was jailed. In August 2013, the Independent Police Complaints Commission, IPCC, said its investigation had substantially ended and that they had found no evidence of criminality by the police. A public inquest looking into the detail which surrounded the death of Mr. Duggan began on the 16th of September 2013 and ended on the 8th of January 2014, with an 8-2 majority concluding that Mr. Duggan's death was in fact a lawful killing. Conflicting accounts of the events leading up to Mr. Duggan's death were provided by the Metropolitan Police, attracting criticism and suspicion from invested parties and other supporters. These critics have accused the Metropolitan Police of misconduct and of failing to cooperate with those who were investigating Mr. Duggan's death. Mark Duggan was born on the 15th of September 1981 and grew up in Broadwater Farm, North London. His parents were of mixed Irish and African Caribbean descent. Between the ages of 12 and 17, he lived with his maternal aunt, Carol, in Manchester. His maternal aunt, Julie, was married to a Manchester gangland boss, Desmond Noonan, a notorious gangster and prominent figure in the Manchester criminal underworld. If you'd like to know more about the Noonan family, we have a documentary for you to check out when you have some spare time. At the time of his death, Mr. Duggan and his long-term partner, Simone Wilson, had 3 children together, aged 10, 7 and 18 months. He had a 4th child with another woman, and a 3rd woman was pregnant with his baby at the time of his death. He was the father of 6 children in total, the youngest whom was born after his death. Mr. Duggan had worked at Stansted Airport and had not long applied for a job as a firefighter before he was killed, according to his cousin. Mr. Duggan's son, Kimani, is a member of the UK drill collective OFB, going by the moniker Band OK. According to Tommy Thompson of the London Evening Standard, Mr. Duggan may have been a founding member of the North London's Star Gang, an offshoot of the Tottenham Mandem Gang. Unnamed police sources alleged via the Daily Telegraph that Mr. Duggan was a well-known gangster and was a major player in the drugs game, as well as being very well known to the police in Tottenham. Officers who were attached to Operation Trident had Mr. Duggan under surveillance. The police stated that they suspected Mr. Duggan was planning to commit a crime with a gun he apparently had in his possession, which was in retaliation for the killing of his cousin, Kelvin Easton, who was stabbed to death outside a bar in East London in March 2011. Police have requested a review into the running of the club, where a man was stabbed to death in the early hours of Sunday morning. Kelvin Easton, who was 23 from Tottenham, North London, was attacked with a champagne bottle at the Bohème nightclub. Paramedics arrived at around 4:30 am, but Mr. Easton was pronounced dead at the scene. According to the police report, which requests the suspension of Bohème's licence, the CCTV hard drive was stolen from the club at the time of the assault, after a member of staff let an unknown male into the room where the hard drive was kept. An unidentified man also gained access to the manager's office. The report lists the club's lack of security as one of the reasons for suspending the licence, although the managers of Bohème have supplied police with other images from the night. The vital CCTV evidence is still missing. The club has also previously received complaints from Mile End residents about noise, parking problems, and fights outside the premises. Only a week before the stabbing, it was fined £6,000 for covering Tower Hamlets in illegal posters. Reports have said that Mr. Easton collapsed at the bottom of the stairs in front of partygoers. Witnesses have described the aftermath as pandemonium. Post-mortem examination was carried out on the following Monday, and it revealed that the cause of death was a stab wound to the heart. Mr. Easton, also known as Smegs, was an inspiring rap artist. Friends have left tributes on his YouTube page saying, "RIP to this lost soldier," and "RIP Smegs, rest with the angels, sweet." Here is some of the music that he made.
I would get down in my old gang, you feel me? Saying nothing. It's like my life's kinda hectic. Boys keep violating like I can't select it. Talk behind my back cheeks, it's just a dress shit. Talk to your friends, I'll burst after them. Then I ain't trying to take a diss, so don't get it twisted. I'll blow you out your kicks, cause I'm down for a fizz. 09 in this shit, I'm a star in the list. So when you see me on the strip, little boy, hold your lips. I'll clutch for my sticks, you know who this is. And I'm down for my biz, so don't take the me. Come and look into my life, it's kinda up still, and I'm surprised I survived. Don't think that I've changed up, I'm still the same guy. I'm just calm, not on the hype. I got money on my mind, G. I'm older now, so I'm just trying to live my life. Enough to get it twisted till I put it back on the side. Tell you the truth, I don't mind. See the reflection in my eyes, that's a star that shines. That's me, no lie, G. Spangs, pass me the weapon. Skills, let's step in with that G57. Nothing talk hard, but bullet that we getting. Nothing move hard, we'll come and walk in my size 7s. And you get corned for a Ross lesson. Come this a blood and you'll be dead in a raw second. My done squeeze up, no messing. Stars on top, see a damn right, the star gets it. And plus the sun starts shining. People open mouths when they see the star gliding. My swagger's all emotional, oh yeah, plus I'm light skinned. That's what them not like him, I'm calm, not on the item. It's on my mind, so you're damn right, I'm grinding. And when it comes to war, I love it, switch and start riding. I ain't gonna like it, sometimes it's hard. Might slip, never fool G, I got sister, yeah. It's still tense, I'm rolling round the hood. Late nights without a vest. My name's still ringing for some dramas and the stress. And looking talk shit, but I slap it in the chest. I don't give a fuck, cause I love it and I'm blessed. A couple of the times I could see my death. I've never seen it happen, so I'm closer to success. I pray to Allah to save me and my friends, but man forget a jest. 09 I ain't hugging, going on to 10. I never switch a friend, even if it's the cause of my death. The only thing I'm switching up on is the rims and the skank. Give my gloves and the belly, I play my position instead. I'm coming in your yard, G. Course that is tense, just give me the food and the money, otherwise I'm blooded upset. I have a cover up my face because I'm baiting the ends, and feds kicking off my door, say with some dangerous men. I just kick back and laugh as I'm bunning on the Zex. Middle finger rough straight, cause I ain't scared of the pen. Do you know what it's like when you ain't got no money to spend? I'm doing the same old thing over and over again, and I'm just standing on the strip cause I know that I'm blessed. And I can do a couple years if they know what I did, but I ain't trying to go back, I ain't trying to do a bit. I gotta think about my people, then I think about kids. I'm a villain, the only things I think about is guns, money and I hit the block and hit some yak and count up some figures. I don't sell weed but I still serve up to this again. You see me on the strip with the hottest of the bitches, but don't watch me cause I'm a penny, you snitches. Keep your eyes on the ball and don't slip cause you'll be missing. And one force move, me my guns will be clipping, but Chewy's on the left, don't think that I'm clipping. I'm a straight up blood, so what the in it I'm thinking. And one shot at this jab have your whole body twitching. You see me on the strip cause I ain't taking no disses. You see me posted up but believe it's selected. All day long, trust me.
Detective Chief Inspector Charles King from the Metropolitan Police Homicide and Serious Crime Command said, "We would urge anyone with any information about the murder of Kelvin Easton or any witnesses to the incident at the Boheme nightclub to come forward." Boheme's owners have released a statement saying, "We will be working alongside the police, using our in-house ID scan to ensure that the person responsible is caught." In January 2011, Mr. Easton and Warren Allen, who had been friends, fell out on a drunken night out in the Old Jewelry. 3 months later, Mr. Easton stabbed a close friend of Mr. Allen in the Boheme nightclub in Mile End Road. Mr. Easton, who was 23, was then stabbed himself 4 times, including a thrust to his heart. He had tried to escape down the stairs of the club, but collapsed and died. The underworld grapevine pointed at Mr. Allen, who had been at the club that night, as the killer, but he was later cleared by the jury. Mr. Duggam was described as having been increasingly paranoid as the consequence of his cousin's death. The Daily Telegraph alleged that Mr. Duggan was bound to avenge his cousin's death by the street code of the gang. After Mr. Duggan's death, he was described as a drug dealer by the police and others, an allegation which has always been strongly denied by his family and friends. Mr. Duggan's family said the allegations against Mr. Duggan were disinformation, do not try and diminish his character, and that he was not in any way a gang member and he had no criminal record. However, it was later revealed that Mr. Duggan had been convicted of cannabis possession and handling stolen goods. It was also reported that his fiancée said he had spent some time on remand. On Ferry Lane in Tottenham Hale, officers of the Metropolitan Police Service stopped a minicab which was carrying Mr. Duggan as a passenger at around 6:15 PM on the 4th of August 2011. There was at the time no CCTV coverage of the exact place where they had stopped the cab. According to an unnamed firearms officer at the trial of Kelvin Hutchinson-Foster in September 2012, Mr. Duggan pivoted out of the cab and pulled a self-loading pistol or handgun from his waistband. According to the taxi driver, who was granted anonymity at a subsequent inquest, Mr. Duggan had left the car and had ran. The car that had stopped us, men got out of it very quickly who were carrying guns in their hands. Then I heard the sound of my rear door opening. I saw that a man who was in the back, that I now know as Mark Duggan, got out and ran. At the same time, I heard shots being fired from the front. I saw shots strike Mark Duggan. He fell to the ground. Mark Duggan only got 2 to 3 feet away from the car when he was shot. At the same time, a man came and he opened my door. He very angrily pulled me out by my arm, and then he dropped me or knelt me down on the ground by the rear tyres of the car. The taxi driver told the inquest that the armed officer had threatened to shoot him if he did not stop looking at where Mr. Duggan had fallen on the ground, and said that he was being handled quite harshly and callously by officers at the scene. The police had fired twice, hitting Mr. Duggan in the biceps and chest, killing him. A firearm was found at the scene. Paramedics from London's ambulance service and medical staff from London's air ambulance attended but Mr. Duggan was pronounced dead at the scene at 6:41 p.m. It was later revealed that the police who had shot Mr. Duggan were part of a Specialist Firearms Command Unit, CO-19, and were accompanying officers from Operation Trident. According to one eyewitness, which was cited by The Independent, Mr. Duggan was shot while he was pinned down on the floor by police. According to another eyewitness, cited again in the Telegraph, a police officer had shouted to the man to stop a couple of times, but he had not heeded the warning. According to a witness cited by the BBC, a police officer twice shouted, "Put it down," before Mr. Duggan was shot. However, the taxi driver who was travelling with Mr. Duggan told the inquest the police shouted no warning before the shooting. A Metropolitan Police Federation representative asserted that the officer who killed Mr. Duggan had an honest held self-belief that he was in imminent danger of him and his colleagues being shot. One of the officers who was surrounding Mr. Duggan was hit by a bullet which lodged into his radio. It had been fired by the policeman identified only as V53 and had passed through Mr. Duggan's arm and then hit the officer. The shot policeman was taken to a hospital and discharged the same evening. Police proceeded to move the taxi in which Mr. Duggan had been travelling. After some dispute over when the vehicle was moved, it was stated that the police moved the taxi for examination and then returned it to the scene. A local equality advocate said that the IPCC initially had no knowledge of these events, but later stated that it had sanctioned removal of the vehicle and then requested that it be restored to the scene. An initial short-form report of the incident which took place, fired by an officer who was only identified as W70, did not say that Mr. Duggan had raised a gun. W70 filed another report 48 hours later, which described Mr. Duggan drawing his gun from his waistband. Officer W70 later testified that short-form reports are deliberately brief. The police did not inform Mr. Duggan's family of his death until a day and a half after he was killed. The police had later apologised for this delay. Initially, a spokesperson for the Independent Police Complaints Commission, IPCC, stated that they understand the officer was shot first before Mr. Duggan himself was shot. Police later called this statement a mistake. A bullet was found embedded in a radio worn by a policeman, and ballistic tests on the projectile indicated that it was a jacketed round, or police-issue bullet fired from a Heckler & Koch MP5 semi-automatic carbine, which is used by the police. Its presence may have been due to the ricochet or over-penetration. On the 18th of November 2011, the IPCC announced that a 9mm gun associated with the scene of the killing had been found 10 to 14 feet or 3 to 4.3 meters away on the other side of the fence. QC Michael Mansfield, a barrister for the Duggan family, told the IPCC that witnesses had told him that they saw police throw the gun over the fence. The IPCC initially reported that 3 officers had also witnessed an officer throw a gun, but later retracted this report. The IPCC had commissioned tests on the pistol by the Forensic Science Service and had received advice that it was an illegal firearm. The gun wrapped in the sock, a practice allegedly used to avoid leaving evidence if it was used. The IPCC announced on the 9th of August that there was no evidence that the gun had been fired, that this had not been ruled out, and further tests were being conducted. It was also announced on the 18th of November 2011 that the IPCC would investigate whether the same gun had been used in an incident 6 days earlier, on the 29th of July 2011, when barber Peter Osadebe was assaulted in Hackney by a 30-year-old Kelvin Hutchinson-Foster after Mr. Hutchinson-Foster had brandished the gun. On the 31st of January 2013, Kelvin Hutchinson-Foster was found guilty of supplying the gun to Mr. Duggan, during which he admitted using the same weapon to beat Mr. Osadebe. Mr. Duggan's fingerprints were found on a cardboard box, which appeared to have contained the gun when he collected it. The sock with the gun inside was found out of this box as much as 20 feet away from where Mr. Duggam was shot. Neither his DNA nor fingerprints were found on the sock which wrapped the gun, nor on the weapon itself. Additional tests found no gunshot residue on Mr. Duggan. News of Mr. Duggan's death was publicised very quickly. Soon after Mr. Duggan was shot, an image was posted on Facebook showing the police standing over a body that may have been his. Outrage about the police killing quickly escalated. There was a long history of tension between black communities and the police before and since the Broadwater Farm Riot in 1985. In which, according to David Lammy, the Labour MP for Tottenham, the cracks that had already existed between the police and the communities became deep fissures. In 1985, there had been some progress made in the relationship between the local community and the police, but the shooting had now raised tensions. Mr. Lammy stated that Mr. Duggan's death occurred as part of a history in Tottenham that involved deaths in police custody. Claudia Webb, the chairperson of Operation Trident, asserted that many black people see Mr. Duggan's shooting as yet another unjust death in custody, and that young black people in Tottenham are still 6, 7 or 8 times more likely to be stopped and searched than their white counterparts. Black British novelist Alex Wheatle, who served a term of imprisonment for crimes he committed in the 1981 Brixton riot, asserted that there was a deep aggravation that, despite many black deaths in police custody, there had never been a conviction of a police officer. He said, in 2011, uprisings were caused by the brutal police shooting of Mark Duggan, a 29-year-old black man who died due to this violence. The uprising first began in Tottenham, where Mr. Duggan was shot. Then happens across London and spread nationally to cities in the UK. In the 2011 uprising, physical damage again impacted black communities. As a young teenager during this time, I remember seeing this both first and second hand. The news was flooded with coverage of damages incurred, such as burning cars and buildings, lootings, and violent clashes between protesters and the police. The media frequently laid blame on black people and did not take into account the systematic racism at the root of Mark Duggan's shooting by the police and the unrest that followed. During this time, I was 13 years old. The upheaval of the uprising invoked strong emotions within me. I felt scared, but the events also seemed intangible, as I mainly saw them in the media. I felt confused, but not in its simple definition of not having a basic understanding of the situation. My confusion was layered with questioning. Why couldn't people who share me and my family's identities be left alone, be allowed to just exist without threat or attack from others? Why did there need to be this destruction for black people's voices to be heard? In 2011, lots of shops were damaged or looted in areas where black communities were located. This again emphasized the many layers of physical damage in these uprisings and the way they reflected larger systematic issues. For example, some of the shops were attacked specifically because they represented large corporate structures whose interests and profits are rooted in exploitative capitalism. But again, this physical damage was happening on black people's doorsteps, causing direct impact to their lives. One of these impacts was highlighting to the rest of the country that the UK has a serious racism issue that must be dealt with. In 2017, Tony Hanley, the firearms officer who recommended the bullets used to kill Mr. Duggan, had a mental breakdown and attempted suicide before fatally shooting himself. Mr. Hanley described feeling responsible for Mr. Duggan's death, seeing his ghost. A Metropolitan Police firearms specialist shot himself because he felt responsible for the fatal shooting of Mark Duggan. Civilian employee Tony Hanley, 51, turned a revolver on himself when negotiations with armed officers broke down near his home in Wallington, South London. Officers had tried to talk to him on January 30th, 2016 and used a taser with 2 rubber bullets to try and bring the standoff to an end. But Mr. Hanley shot himself in the head and died following a day in hospital. An inquest into his death was told how the officer felt responsible for the death of Mr. Duggan, who was shot dead by police in North London in 2011 because he had recommended the type of bullets used by the armed police. South London's coroner court told the firearms specialist who worked for the Met Police as a physical protection technician had also suffered a breakdown due to alleged bullying at work. Prior to his death, he had been off sick for 3 months, suffering from anxiety and depression. He has also been drinking a bottle of whiskey a day, on or off, for 8 years. The inquest heard how, the day before the shooting, he attended his GP surgery saying he had felt suicidal and that he would take others with him. Senior coroner Selina Lynch told the jury that on the day of his death, he had been with his girlfriend Tina Harper. She said, "He told me he was really depressed and I said to him, you will get through it. And he said, you don't know what's going on in my head." He eventually went to the toilet but came back out the room and grabbed her, which she said was very unlike him. Miss Harper added, he kept saying he was responsible for the death of Mark Duggan because of the bullets. I said he wasn't. I said, you didn't authorize it and you hadn't shot him. He said he was the person who recommended the bullets they were using. He said he kept seeing Mark Duggan's ghost and it never left his mind. Miss Harper said that Mr. Hanley had been drinking and discussed threatening to harm himself and others and was also in the possession of a handgun. She left his flat to call for help, but just after 8 PM he called the police saying he had a gun to his head and asked for help. Armed officers rushed to his house, but they found him in a nearby street with a handgun. The coroner said armed officers then approached from the side and fired 2 baton rounds and a taser. He raised the handgun and shot himself in the head. He was taken to hospital by ambulance, but died the next day. Mr. Hanley was described as placid and calm by his sister Laura, who added he collected decommissioned pistols and shells from the Second World War. His brother Gerard said he met with his brother a week before his death, and there was no indication that he was unwell. He said Tony would complain about work and felt his expertise was ignored by the management. The court also heard from his GP, Dr. Mohammed Amjad Khan, who said that Mr. Hanley had previously been off work for 18 months in the year 2000, suffering with depression. He was referred to the mental health services and went to appointments to help with his alcohol abuse. In the follow-up report, clinical psychologist Dr. Yvonne Hemming said he reported extreme depression, which had been triggered by long-standing workplace bullying. He was better when he was not at work. The inquest heard Dr. Amjad had seen Mr. Hanley for an emergency consultation the day before his death. Mr. Hanley had told another doctor he had felt suicidal, saying if he kills himself, he will take others with him. However, Dr. Amjad said by the time he saw Mr. Hanley, he was calm and placid and prescribed him diazepam to help him sleep. But he said he had refused to go A&E for a psychiatric assessment, instead making an appointment to see someone on Monday. The inquest was read in text from Mr. Hanley to his partner, in which he said doctors couldn't help him because it was the weekend. He said, "They told me to go back on Monday. I told them I don't think I'll be around on Monday. I told them that I would take others. They said it's Friday and the hospital will be busy." Ms. Harper said she and Mr. Hanley had been in an on and off relationship for around 20 years. On the day of the shooting, she went to his flat at around 6:20 PM, where he answered the door in boxing shorts and a t-shirt. She added that he said I wasn't safe. There was something very, very different to how he was. He had always made me feel very safe. At around 5:30 PM on the 6th of August 2011, Mr. Duggan's relatives and local residents marched from Broadwater Farm to Tottenham Police Station. The demonstrators chanted "We want answers" and protested for requested information from the police about the circumstances surrounding Mr. Duggan's death. The crowd had also made broader demands for justice, which many had seen their own way of seeking to publicise ongoing poor relations with the police, which was taking place in their community. The chief inspector spoke with the demonstrators, but they had demanded to see a higher ranking officer. At around 8 o'clock that night, a 16-year-old girl had approached them and may had thrown a leaflet or a stone. Police swarmed the girl with their shields and batons, allegedly causing her head injuries. At around 8:20 PM, members of the waiting crowd attacked 2 nearby police cars, setting them on fire. According to the Metropolitan Police commander at the time, Adrian Hanstock. The violence was started by certain elements who were not involved with the vigil. Other observers had stated that the rally had begun peacefully but was incited by the police attack. In 2011, the London riots were a series of violent disturbances that took place across several London boroughs and other cities in England between the 6th of August and the 11th of August 2011. These riots were sparked by the police shooting of Mark Duggan, a 29-year-old man from Tottenham, on the 4th of August 2011. The exact sequence of events leading up to the riots is complex, but there was some protests that happened between the shooting of Mark Duggan and the start of the London riots. Here is a detailed explanation. Following the news of Mark Duggan's death, his family, friends and members of the local community organised a peaceful vigil outside the Tottenham police station. The purpose of the gathering was to demand answers and the justice for Mr. Duggan's death. A group of around 300 people marched from Broadwater Farm, a housing estate in Tottenham, to the police station on the High Road. While the initial gathering was peaceful, the situation began to escalate as some protesters clashed with the police. It is not entirely clear what caused the escalation, but some reports suggested that the tensions were fueled by a combination of factors, including misinformation about the circumstances of Mr. Duggan's death, heavy-handed policing, and a general atmosphere of mistrust between the police and the community. As the situation continued to deteriorate, the peaceful protest turned into a full-blown riot in Tottenham. Rioters set fire to buildings, looted shops, and engaged in violent confrontations with the police. The violence soon spread to other areas in London, including Enfield, Brixton and Wolverstone, and eventually to other cities in England. It is important to note that while the protests following the shooting of Mark Duggan served as a catalyst for the London riots, the riots themselves were also driven by a broader range of social, economic and political factors. These included high youth unemployment, deep-seated grievances about the perceived social and economic inequality, and long-standing tensions between the police and certain communities. Rioting, arson and looting spread to other parts of London and to elsewhere in England. Rioters had expressed mixed motivations for rioting, including policing issues, poverty and racial tension with the police. Mr. Duggan's family commended the disorder. His older brother said, "We are not condoning any kind of actions like that at all." While Mr. Duggan's shooting was perhaps the trigger for the violence, several other causes of the riots have also been suggested. Former British Prime Minister David Cameron rejected a casual relationship between the death of Mr. Duggan and the subsequent looting. Mr. Duggan's death had quickly become a major media story in the UK. Initially, the media, including the BBC, had incorrectly reported that one shot was discharged from an illegal firearm inside a car. The Independent had also stated on the 8th of January 2014 that authorities wrongly said that Mr. Duggan had been hit in an exchange of fire. Some of the media were criticised for portraying Mr. Duggan as a gangster, confused by his criminal record being reported as either extensive or non-existent by different media outlets. The media was also faulted for uncritically reporting of the police's story that Mr. Duggan had fired first, which was also shown to be false. The riots had gotten out of control, had even brought international attention to Mr. Duggan's death, which one Iranian official had even gone as far as describing the incident as a human rights violation. Mr. Duggan's funeral took place at the New Testament Church of God in Wood Green on the 9th of September 2011. The funeral procession was highly publicised and watched by thousands of onlookers. The police did their best not to flare tensions or make the situation within the community any worse, and have maintained a very low profile during the funeral proceedings. The incident was immediately referred to the Independent Police Complaints Commission (IPCC), which was in accordance with police practice when anyone dies or is seriously injured following police contact. Investigators had also distributed leaflets appealing for any witnesses to come forward with any information they have towards the case, no matter how big or small it may be. IPCC officers also searched CCTV footage, 999 calls, and radio transmissions in and around where the police incident had taken place. On the 12th of October 2011, the IPCC announced that in the immediate aftermath of the incident, they may have given misleading information to journalists to the effect that shots were exchanged between Mr. Duggan and the police. Although a bullet had been found lodged in the police radio, there was no evidence that it had come from a gun in Mr. Duggan's possession. In response to the rumours that the killing of Mr. Duggan was an execution, the IPCC announced speculation that Mark Duggan was assassinated in an execution style involving a number of shots to the head are categorically untrue. Mr. Duggan's family stated that they did not trust the IPCC's ability to conduct a fair and independent investigation of the killing and asked for an independent inquiry into the relationship between the Metropolitan Police and the IPCC. They sought to commission an independent second post-mortem. Coroner Andrew Walker scheduled an initial hearing for the 12th of December 2011. In November 2011, 2 members of the Community Reference Group appointed by the IPCC resigned from those posts. A third remained in post. One of those who left said, "I have been alarmed to learn that not only have the IPCC broken their own guidelines by giving out incorrect information to journalists regarding the shootout involving Mark Duggan and the police that didn't even happen, but I have also discovered that their investigation is flawed and in all probability tainted to the degree that means we will never be able to have the faith in their final report into the killing." On the 29th of February 2012, the IPCC upheld a complaint that the Metropolitan Police had not adequately informed Mr. Duggan's family of his death on the 4th of August 2011. The IPCC's inquiry expressly did not address the events on the 6th of August 2011 and afterwards. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Steve Kavanagh of the Metropolitan Police had already issued an apology in August 2011 to the Duggan family for the manner in which the police initially communicated with them, suggesting that the IPCC did in fact have a responsibility to provide accurate information to Mr. Duggan's family. In late March 2012, the IPCC indicated that the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act of 2000 made it impossible for the organisation to reveal information obtained during its investigation into Mr. Duggan's death, making it doubtful if a public coroner's inquest into the killing could ever be heard. In April 2012, the BBC aired footage of the immediate aftermath of the shooting. The footage showed paramedics handling Mr. Duggan's body. The IPCC commended the BBC for showing the footage without first consulting with them. The IPCC was expected to release its report on the killing in the summer of 2012. Because no report has been issued by January 2013, a planned inquest into the killing was delayed until September. The IPCC announced in March 2013 that it would issue a report in April for delivery to the inquest in May. Referring to the officers who killed Mr. Duggan, an IPCC spokesperson announced on the 2nd of August 2013 that "we have found no evidence to indicate any criminality at this stage." The IPCC said its investigation had substantially ended and that our final report would later be issued in August. The 11 officers involved had initially refused interviews with the IPCC. The officer who killed Mr. Duggan, now known as V53, later submitted testimony in writing. In December 2019, forensic investigators called for the 2011 case to be reopened, claiming that a virtual model of the shooting cast doubts on its findings. Their report was released to the public in June 2020. The IOPC, the successor for the IPCC, said in May 2021 that it would not reopen the investigation because there was nothing new in the reports to suggest that the findings of its investigation were incorrect. The police stated that no officer had done anything wrong, but announced that the person who shot Mr. Duggan would not remain on active firearms duty. The firearms officer involved in the operation, known only as V53, provided a written statement to the IPCC but refused to be interviewed. David Lammy, the MP for Tottenham, was critical of his refusal. The IPCC asked for the power to interview police officers, even if they were not suspected of committing a crime. In November 2011, the IPCC began an investigation into the quality of the investigative response by police to an incident on 29th of July 2011, for which police charged Kelvin Hutchinson-Foster with possession of a handgun, believing the gun may have been the same found at the shooting of Mr. Mark Duggan. On the 18th of September 2012, Mr. Hutchinson-Foster's trial commenced in the Crown Court of Snarebrook. The defendant was charged with supplying Mr. Duggan with a BBM Bruni Model 92 handgun found near Mr. Duggan's car after his death. The defendant had denied the charge and gave his explanation for the presence of his DNA on the gun by alleging that he had been beaten with the weapon by a gang that included Mr. Duggan. During the trial, prosecutor Edward Brown QC of QEB Hollins Whiteman contended that Mr. Duggan travelled to Leighton to collect the gun from Mr. Hutchinson-Foster before driving to Tottenham with it. The police alleged that Mr. Duggan had received the gun from Mr. Hutchinson-Foster 12 to 15 minutes before he was shot by armed officers. The trial included testimony from 7 police officers who were allowed to remain anonymous and use pseudonyms. The police alleged that Mr. Duggan had pulled the gun from his waistband and pointed at the police before they shot him. According to the evidence given by the cab driver and corroborated by one policeman present at the scene, Mr. Duggan got out of the taxi and ran in an attempt to escape. The driver stated, "I saw that Mark Duggan got out and ran. At the same time, I heard firing from the front. I saw shots strike Mark Duggan. He fell to the ground. Mark Duggan only got 2 to 3 feet from my car when he was shot," the taxi driver later testified. Simon Paul, a pathologist who performed a post-mortem on Mr. Duggan's body, testified in January 2013 at the retrial of Mr. Kelvin Hutchinson-Foster and asserted that the injuries Mr. Duggan sustained in the shooting were not consistent with the account of the incident that was given by the police officer who fired the lethal shot. Questioned by a barrister representing Mr. Hutchinson-Foster, Mr. Paul said that the police bullet had penetrated Mr. Duggan's body on the right side and travelled from right to left. Mr. Paul agreed with the barrister's statement, so the scenario can't be right. The officer fires to his left and the bullet hits Mr. Duggan in his chest, and so it should go from left to right, but it went from right to left. Therefore, the scenario can't be right. Mr. Paul also later agreed with the prosecution that if Mr. Duggan had turned to face the officer who shot him, his position relative to them would have changed. A December 2011 IPCC statement had cited Mr. Paul for discovering that a second bullet struck Mr. Duggan's arm. On the 17th of October 2012, the jury failed to reach a verdict. A retrial date was set for 2013, and on the 31st of January 2013, the defendant was convicted of supplying Mark Duggan with a handgun. On the 26th of February 2013, the defendant was sentenced to 11 years in prison, 7 years for supplying the gun, and 4 years related to the offences. The Hutchinson-Foster verdict did not resolve a number of central questions related to Mr. Duggan's killing, which remained open until the inquest later in 2013. Following interviews in the Tottenham area, some residents had revealed that they do not trust the police or investigators and say that Mr. Duggan was executed by the police. A report due in summer of 2012 was announced delayed in October 2012. Mr. Duggan's family and members of his community suggested that they did not consider the IPCC impartial and did not believe that the investigation was succeeding. Frustration with official investigations mounted in May 2012 when it was announced that the 31 police witnesses would not be required to answer questions, instead submitting written testimonies. David Lammy MP from Tottenham stated, "It is unacceptable that police officers have not made themselves available for interview, and it is unacceptable that the IPCC does not have the powers to compel them to do so." Mark Duggan's family did not believe that the police had been honest about the shooting and had pressured the police and the IPCC for greater transparency surrounding what happened. Mr. Duggan's sister, Paulette Hall, has stated that "we want justice. We want them to come clean and tell us what happened. The police are humans like us. If you kill someone, you should do the time, just like we would have to do." Miss Hall has reiterated concerns about media portrayals and produced her own film titled The Real Story of Mark Duggan. Mr. Duggan's mother, Pamela, has said that "we still don't have justice. I won't give up until I get justice for Mark. People need to be held account for my son's death. There needs to be a full inquest in front of a jury of ordinary men and women to find out the truth." She sought judicial review of the case, requesting oversight of the Association of Chief Police Officers, ACPO, and the IPCC. London's High Court of Justice rejected her application for a judicial review on the 18th of June 2013. The family have criticised the IPCC for delaying the investigation, expecting an inquest to begin on the 28th of January and instead facing indefinite postponement. A barrister for the Duggan family commented, "It is absolutely shocking to find ourselves here today and to hear your counsel saying that there are further investigations, basic investigations, to be conducted, such as a reconstruction and forensics." Stafford Scott, originally appointed as an advisor to Operation Trident, resigned from the investigation because he felt that it was not being conducted fairly. Writing in The Guardian, he stated, "The IPCC has broken its own guidelines by giving out incorrect information to journalists regarding the shootout between Mr. Duggan and the police that didn't actually happen, and its investigation is flawed and in all probability tainted, so much so that we can never have faith in its final report." Mr. Scott blames the police response to Mark Duggan's shooting for the escalation of the 2011 riots. He later criticised authorities for treating the Hutchinson-Foster situation as a proxy for the Duggan investigation, while continuing to delay the official inquest in Mr. Duggan's death. He says that members of Mr. Duggan's community feel ignored and lied to by the authorities, writing in March 2012. In August 2011, the word on the street was they had executed Mark. 7 months later, the word is that the police had control of the gun or worse. After the Hutchinson-Foster trial, Mr. Scott criticised the Trident police for inaction, writing, "So it is now clear that the police had a golden opportunity to remove the identified gunman and a firearm off the streets, but somehow managed not to do so. And this is all the more shocking because the police have a special unit, Trident, established specifically to deal with gun crime in the black community." At a pre-inquest hearing in June 2012, Coroner Andrew Walker said it was quite extraordinary that the IPCC refused to provide witness statements. He ordered the material to be disclosed in 28 days. Representing the Duggan family, Michael Mansfield QC said the IPCC's position was utterly unacceptable and warned them that they would be in contempt if they refused the coroner's order. A public inquest on the killing had been scheduled for the 28th of January 2013. On the 25th of January, the inquest was declared indefinitely postponed because the IPCC had not yet released its report. Judge Keith Cutler later announced that the inquest would begin on the 16th of September 2013. The inquest was expected to last for 6 to 8 weeks. The government created a website for publicising materials related to the inquest and considered a live broadcast for some of the proceedings. Testimony from firearm officers was to remain entirely anonymous. Members of the inquest jury may also be kept anonymous. Inquest hearings began on the 16th of September 2013. The jury began with a visit to the street in Tottenham where Mr. Duggan was killed in 2011. Police maintained that Mr. Duggan was a gang member linked to violent crime, as well as gun crime. He was involved in the supply of Class A drugs and possession of ammunition, said Detective Inspector Mick Foote. Mr. Foote denied making the claim that Mr. Duggan had fired at police, saying he was surprised that early reports of the incident had been described as a shootout. The IPCC later concluded it had misled journalists shortly after the shooting by saying that shots were exchanged. A police officer appearing in support of the IPCC wrote in a statement that during informal briefings at the scene of death, officers had apparently thrown a firearm found in Mr. Duggan's possession, over a fence, so that it was out of reach and would no longer pose a threat to them. No other officer confirmed this. The jury learned that Mr. Duggan had been killed by a 9mm parabellum hollow point bullet travelling at 870 miles per hour. This type of bullet is designed to cause instant incapacitation. Pathologist Derek Pounder said the police had simply got it wrong in their accounts of the shooting. Mr. Pounder testified that Mr. Duggan was first hit by a non-fatal shot to the arm and then killed by a second shot to the chest. Lawyers for the Duggan family argued that the police had planted the handgun found at the scene. Two witnesses testified that they saw police officers move something from the minicab to the place where the gun was found, 20 feet away from Mr. Duggan's body. One witness, Miss J, said she saw an officer pick up a gun, adding, "It will never leave me for the simple reason it's not often you see a gun in broad daylight." She said the officer had an expression like he had found gold. Miss J was standing 50 meters away from the scene with a fence in between, and the final IPC report noted that there were many discrepancies between her accounts, which overall lessens the weight that can be attached to her observations, as they render her evidence unreliable and contradictory. The driver for the minicab testified that he did not see a gun in Mr. Duggan's hand, nor did he see one fly through the air. He said Mr. Duggan was shot in the back. Another witness said there was definitely a phone in Mr. Duggan's hand. During the inquest, Ian Stern, counsel for the police, suggested that the same witness, the only one to actually see Mr. Duggan being shot, he had earlier told a journalist that he, referring to Mr. Duggan, had been holding a handgun. The witness denied ever making such a statement. V53, the officer who shot and killed Mr. Duggan, had testified that Mr. Duggan was still holding a gun after both of the shots were fired, saying his eyes were glued to the gun. Military surgeon Jonathan Clasper testified that it would be difficult to imagine Mr. Duggan throwing his gun 20 feet after being hit by two shots. Near the end of the hearings, lawyer Leslie Thomas confronted the police officer V59 with the possibility that the gun had been planted, saying, "I'm going to suggest to you, V59, that you knew where the gun was before the officer had gone round the fence, because you and all of your colleagues had planted it there." The officer replied, "I did not plant any gun at any scene. I find that highly offensive." The lawyer accused Officer W70 of inconsistencies and omissions in their testimony. During the inquest, student protesters were heard chanting, "Who killed Mark Duggan? You killed Mark Duggan." On the 11th of December, students protest outside the Royal Courts of Justice while the inquest was underway. The jury began deliberations on the 10th of December 2013 and were asked to render a verdict of unlawful killing, lawful killing, or open verdict. Subsequently, Mr. Cutler told the jury that he would accept the conclusion based on a majority agreement by 8 of the 10 jurors. The jury interrupted deliberations over Christmas and was resumed on the 7th of January 2014. They delivered their conclusions at approximately 4 o'clock on the 8th of January, concluding by an 8-2 majority that Mr. Duggan's death was a lawful killing. Following the inquest, a case was brought by Mr. Duggan's mother to the High Court seeking a judicial review, arguing that the coroner's directions to the jury were legally incorrect. The direction to the jury instructed them to determine whether or not the officer who shot Mr. Duggan was acting on honest belief that Mr. Duggan was a threat, not whether his belief was reasonable. The case challenged the legal standard for self-defense as being incompatible with Article 2 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which protects the right to life. In October 2014, the High Court rejected this challenge. Leave was given to appeal the case to the Civil Division of the Courts of Appeal of England and Wales, but the Appellate Court also rejected the claims in 2017. In March 2019, Mr. Duggan's family brought a civil claim against the Metropolitan Police. This claim was settled in October 2019. The terms of the settlement were confidential. The Metropolitan Police did not admit liability for Mr. Duggan's death. On the 4th of August 2011, Mark Duggan got out of a taxi on Ferry Lane in Tottenham and was shot dead by armed police. Within hours, stories about a dramatic shootout, a violent gangster and a gangland revenge killings began to circulate. 2 years later, in September 2013, the inquest jury was told that they were on a quest to find the truth, a process that lasted 3 months and involved 93 witnesses. On January 2014, after several days of deliberations, the jury eventually delivered their verdict of a lawful killing, and the public gallery erupted in disbelief and outrage. All 10 jurors agreed that there had been a gun in a taxi with Mark Duggan. 8 of them disbelieved the evidence of the police marksman who shot him, and were sure the gun was not in his hands when he was shot dead. But despite this, an 8-2 majority concluded that he had been killed lawfully. Their explanation for the whereabouts of the gun was that he must have thrown it from the taxi before he was surrounded, but no witnesses gave any evidence to support this idea. Immediately, the family's legal team asked the High Court to quash the verdict as perverse, arguing that Judge Cutler, presiding over the inquest, should have provided clearer direction to the jury. The inquest also raised questions about the possibility of police officers conferring as they produced their statements, and the family was given permission to challenge these practices in March 2014. Despite the lengthy inquest and the long wait, there are still many questions unanswered. What is known is that the death of Mark Duggan will go down in history as an event that sparked the August 2011 riots. As well as understanding this important connection, we also need to be aware that the wider political context of the riots has had implications for the subsequent investigations of the shooting of Mark Duggan. Right from the beginning, the police, the Independent Police Complaints Commission (IPCC), and judiciary, as well as the media, have played an important role in determining how the shooting was framed, long before the jury sat down in the courtroom. Policing operation that led to Mark Duggan's death was run by Trident, a unit within the Metropolitan Police specialising in gun crime within London's black communities. Trident was set up in 1998 following a series of shootings and murders in Lambeth and Brent. At the time, there was a widespread concern within the black community about these shootings, and so there was support for a dedicated unit to tackle gun crime. An independent advisory group, IAG, was set up to ensure community oversight and accountability in this most sensitive area of policing. The IAG was often very vocal in its criticism of Trident's operations, particularly its mostly white workforce. Over the years, Trident operations shift. As well as a reactive investigation of shootings, it began to use proactive teams conducting covert investigations into particular individuals suspected of having connections to gun crimes. Legislation passed over the last 15 years has progressively increased the use of secret evidence, which has significantly undermined the accountability of policing operations. In 2008, legislation was passed enabling the use of evidence in court from anonymous witnesses to secure convictions. And 8 years before that, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, RIPA, in 2000 was passed, protecting so-called intercept evidence, phone taps for example, from being heard in court. It was the use of secret evidence under the RIPA powers that caused the collapse of the inquest into the death of Azal Rodney a black man who was shot dead by police officers in April 2005 in North London. During the original inquest, the Rodney family demanded to hear evidence about the police pursuit that the police were withholding. The inquest could not continue, and it was eventually decided to hold an inquiry that had greater powers to close hearings, restrict attendance, and withhold sensitive information. The suppression of some of the evidence relating to Azal Rodney's death and the difficulties that ensued were cited by the government as a reason to extend the use of the secret evidence to civil proceedings, including inquests. These proposals were eventually brought in with the Justice and Security Act, which came into law in 2013, although due to widespread objection, they excluded inquests. However, the Azal Rodney Inquiry Chair, Sir Christopher Holland, appeared to undermine this assertion when he said that much of the secret evidence did not need to be secret. The inquiry eventually found in 2013, 9 years after his death, that he had been unlawfully killed. By the time the circumstances surrounding Mark Duggan's death came under the spotlight, the secret evidence regime had become established, and for some time it was uncertain whether there would be an inquest at all. Intelligence for Trident's operations came from an intercept evidence obtained by the Serious Organised Crime Agency, SOCA, merged into the National Crime Agency since October 2013, and was so protected under the RIPA legislation. The inquest had to be stopped and restarted, with the original coroner replaced by Judge Cutler, who could consider the secret evidence. According to the evidence given by its senior investigating officer at the inquest, Operation Debris was a Trident investigation that had been running since November 2008, focused on dismantling Tottenham Mandem, the TMD, a group the police said was involved in the supply of guns and Class A drugs. Operation Debris focused on around 100 people with a core of 48 people. Whilst giving evidence about the subjects of Operation Debris, including Mark Duggan, officers made assertions about crimes they thought he had committed and about his being a senior member of the gang. Due to the fact that the intelligence was exempt from being scrutinised in court due to the RIPA legislation, most of the assertions remained untested. What is known is that Mark Duggan had never spent time in prison, and that his criminal record consisted of 2 minor convictions, one for receiving stolen goods and one for possession of cannabis, his most recent in 2007. Both had attracted only small fines, although the police made a variety of other assertions about drugs being stored at Mark Duggan's home and that he had fired shots in a car park, that they had a wealth of intelligence, that he had ready access to guns. They also admitted that until 4th of August, they did not have any evidence necessary to arrest him. Some of the intelligence, they said, was of very poor quality, equivalent to something being said to Crime Stoppers by an anonymous caller who overheard something in a pub. The claims about Mark Duggan being a senior member of a gang were made time and time again by the police. During the trial of the man convicted of supplying the gun, Kelvin Hutchinson-Foster, up to and during the inquest, and on each of these occasions were repeated by the media as fact. According to the evidence heard at the inquest, Trident's Operation Debris planned a 4-day operation from the 3rd until the 7th of August 2011 to recover guns from around 6 people, including Mark Duggan. This operation involved officers from Trident working together with specialist firearm officers from the CO-19 and armed surveillance officers from SCD-11. The CO-19 officers were plainclothes officers armed with 2 guns and a taser, who had the responsibility for carrying out the operation to recover guns. The operation had planned to target nightclubs, so most of the activity was to take place during the evening. Surveillance officers had tracked Mark on the evening of the 3rd of August before losing him. On the afternoon of the 4th of August around 5:15 p.m, the police received intelligence that suggested he planned to take possession of a gun from an acquaintance that evening. He was followed to an address in Leighton by the surveillance officers, who said they observed him before getting in a minicab towards Tottenham, still being tailed. More intelligence was then received that confirmed Mr. Duggan had collected a gun. Meanwhile, Trident officers obtained a briefing that then deployed them towards Tottenham in a convoy of cars to intercept a minicab, accompanied by CO19 and SCD-11. At 6 PM, State Amber was called by the Tactical Firearms Commander, known as Z51, meaning that there was enough intelligence to arrest and responsibility for carrying out the operation passed to the leader of the firearms team, known as V59. 13 minutes later, the officer leading the interception, W42, called State Red over the radio and the order strike strike. The hard stop itself was carried out on Ferry Lane, Tottenham, next to a bus stop and not that far from Tottenham Hale tube station. Officers in 3 cars surrounded the minicab, forcing it to stop, then got out and surrounded it on foot, shouting and pointing their loaded weapons at Mark Duggan and the minicab driver, a tactic designed to shock and awe suspects into submission. It didn't work. Mark Duggan got out of the car onto the pavement, at which point he was shot twice, once in the right arm causing a minor wound, and also in the chest, which was fatal. One of the bullets passed through his body and struck a police officer, W42, who was not injured because it hit his radio. CPR was performed on Mark, but he was pronounced dead at the scene at 6:41 PM. In the immediate aftermath of the death, the family were not officially informed by the police, in contravention to the statutory obligations. As a result, there was a confusion on the part of the family over whether the dead man was actually Mark. His sister, brother, and Simone Wilson, his fiancée, had attended the scene, but they said they left unsure whether the dead man was Mark, as they had been told the dead man was an agent, which can be seen in the IPCC report into the complaint. At least one member of the family drove to Whitechapel Hospital believing that he had been taken there alive by air ambulance, only to find out it was actually the injured firearms officer who had been transported. Statements read out at the inquest revealed. Because they had not been formally told, it was difficult for them to comprehend what had happened. Pamela Duggan said, "A mother's worst nightmare is the police coming to your door to tell you that your child is dead. Because this did not happen, I believed the worst had not happened." Frustrated with the lack of engagement, on the 6th of August the family arranged a march to the police station to demand that someone come out to speak to them. Around 300 people gathered. They were there for several hours and continued to demand a senior officer come to speak to them. Later that night, rioting broke out across Tottenham, which over the next few days spread across London and several other cities in England. The police apologised for the lack of communication several days later, on the 8th of August, partially blaming the IPCC. I think both the Independent Police Complaints Commission, IPCC, and the Metropolitan Police could have managed that family's needs more effectively, said the Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Stephen Kavanagh. The IPCC responded defensively saying, "I am very clear that the concerns were not about the lack of contact or support from the IPCC. It is never the responsibility of the IPCC to deliver a message regarding someone's death." The police stated they had not visited the home of Mark Duggan's parents to inform them because the family liaison officers at the scene had not been told to by his sister and partner because it would have been too upsetting. Family members categorically denied this. Police subsequently offered to meet with the family in person and eventually did so on the 2nd of September. The Met repeated its apology in February 2012 when a family complaint was upheld by the IPCC. Meanwhile, misleading information was being fed to the media, resulting in widespread references to a shootout and statements that shots had been fired at the police by Mark Duggan. At least some of this misinformation appears to have come from the IPCC. Its initial written statement made no reference to any shootout, but several media reports that did quoted the IPCC as a source, indicating that at least one spokesperson had verbally misled journalists. The Guardian made reference to an apparent exchange of fire and a confrontation. The Telegraph went further, stating that gunman Mark Duggan opened fire, quoting the IPCC as saying, "We understand the officer was shot first before the male was shot." The Evening Standard said that the IPCC spokesman had stated that the suspect had fired first. The Mirror, on the 5th of August 2011, and The Independent both said that it appeared the police officer had been shot first, and quoted the IPCC as a source. It wasn't until several days later that the truth began to seep out, as media outlets reported on the 8th of August that ballistics examinations had proved that the bullet lodged in the radio was a police-issued bullet. The IPCC refused to comment on the ballistics reports, then issued a statement on the 9th of August confirming that the bullets had been police-issued. The following week, following pressure from The Guardian, the IPCC issued a statement that conceded it may had inadvertently given misleading information to journalists following the shooting, it said. Having reviewed the information the IPCC received and gave out during the very early hours of the unfolding incident, before any documentation had been revealed, it seems possible that we may have verbally led journalists to believe that shots were exchanged, as this was consistent with early information we received that an officer had been shot and taken to hospital. Any reference to an exchange of shots was not correct, and it did not feature in any of our formal statements, although an officer was taken to hospital as per the incident. At the pre-inquest hearing in December 2011, the IPCC's lead investigator, Colin Sparrow, apologised for the misinformation, saying it had been a mistake. The impression that is carefully employed in these statements is that the ballistic examinations were unable to clear up initial confusion over what had happened. The IPCC suggested that its earlier information was incomplete, and this led to wrong inferences being made. However, according to the evidence given at the inquest, there had been no confusion on the parts of the officers involved. V53 stated, "I knew Mark Duggan never fired at us. We knew that straight away." W42, the one hit by the bullet, concurred. Z51, the senior officer on the scene who was responsible for briefing senior officers who were not present, had made notes at 6:30 p.m. stating that a bullet had ricocheted, and also vigorously denied conveying misinformation to anyone else. Even if there had been confusion over what had happened, the Met's own report into the riots acknowledged experience informs both the police and the IPCC that such early information is often unreliable and should not form the basis for press briefings. It is important to see all of this in context of the riots, and that the IPCC's clear awareness of its important political role in the control of information. David Lammy, MP for Tottenham, had asked the IPCC to release information. He stated in The Guardian that very soon after the shooting, he had spoken to them about accelerating the ballistics report. When the IPC did release the information on the 9th of August, the statement took the opportunity to comment on the riots. I know this is an incredibly difficult time for Mark Duggan's family, who have made it abundantly clear that they in no way condone the violence that we have all seen. Other IPCC statements around this time took a similar conciliatory tone. I understand the distress, people's need for answers. We would request that people have patience while we seek to find these answers. In November 2011, the IPCC took it upon itself to intervene even more directly in the public debate. Another IPCC statement was made that declared the Guardian article misleading, speculative, and wholly irresponsible. The article originally carried the headline and subheadline revealed, "Man whose shooting triggered riots was not armed. Mark Duggan's investigation finds he was not carrying a gun when killed in Tottenham." The Met also complained to the Press Complaints Commission, and this was upheld. The Guardian concluded that the headline was misleading, as it implied the investigation had concluded, and changed it. In its statement, the IPCC urged the public not to rush to judgment until our investigation is complete, and they have the opportunity to see and hear the full evidence themselves. Yet, after stating it was inappropriate to comment on the sequence of events before they had been established, the IPCC made a second statement in the following week saying the minicab had not been moved from the scene before it should have been, and that they were sure the evidence had not been compromised. IPCC Chair Len Jackson said, "I am taking the highly unusual step of clarifying inaccurate, misleading, and more importantly, irresponsible comments that have appeared in the recent days in relation to the IPCC investigation into the circumstances surrounding the death of Mark Duggan. I am doing so because If these inaccuracies continue to gain currency, they risk undermining the integrity of public confidence in our investigation. The context for this later intervention was that Stafford Scott, a long-time campaigner for the riots in Tottenham, had written a comment piece in The Guardian about his resignation from the IPCC Community Reference Group. He made a series of damning allegations about what he called a shoddy investigation, saying that he wanted no part in it. Many of Mr. Scott's allegations stand to this day as unanswered questions, although evidence of the IPCC's mishandling of crucial evidence emerged later that supported some of them. This engagement of a claim and counterclaim at the very least distracted from the IPCC's important task of establishing the truth about the death. Meanwhile, police information apparently fed to the media focused on the portrayal as Mark Duggan as a gangster. The Telegraph quoted unnamed police sources as saying that Mark was a well-known gangster, a man killed in a shooting incident involving a police officer on the 4th of 2011, and a major player heavily involved in criminality who lived by the gun. It was also reported that he had links to Jamaican yardis and that he was associated with Manchester gangsters. Media coverage painting Mark Duggan as a high-profile and dangerous criminal continued over the next 2 years. Even the funeral, attended by over 1,000 people, was portrayed as a sinister tribute to a gang leader. The funeral processions went from his parents' home in Tottenham through the Broadwater Farm estate, where crowds were gathered. The Mail featured a picture of mourners stretching their hands out to the coffin under the headline, "Gangster Salute for a Fallen Soldier," and the Express featured a similar description and suggested that they were making gangland salutes. In fact, the mourners were responding to a call by Bishop Kwaku Frimpong Mason for people to stretch out their hands towards the casket and thank God for Mark's life as he began his heavenly journey. The Mail later printed an apology and slightly amended its article. The Express did not. An image of Mark with a set, unsmiling expression was widely used to accompanying article about his supposed gangster background. This expression was grief. The image had been cropped from a larger photo of him holding a tribute to his dead daughter at her grave. The reporting of the Kelvin Hutchinson-Foster trial had repeated untested claims made by the police about Mark Duggan's supposed criminality. In the months before the inquest, it was also widely reported that Mr. Duggan intended to kill someone with a gun, and that the inquest jury would be considering this. The Telegraph went into particular detail about a tit-for-tat murder in revenge for the death of Mark's cousin, Kelvin Easton. In fact, this question was not put before the jury at all. But when the jury sat down to consider their questions, a spectre of a violent gangster had become firmly attached with the name of Mark Duggan. The first thing most people heard about him was that he probably fired at the police officer. The IPCC statement did too little, too late to dispel these myths, although it intervened with alacrity when reports started to emerge, unarmed man being shot. Furthermore, stories of gangland killings may have discouraged witnesses from coming forward. The only civilian witness to actually see the shootings, witness B, stated he had been reluctant to come forward, not trusting the police, but also not wanting to be bothered with any gangs. The inquest involved 93 witnesses, many of whom were granted anonymity, including most of the police officers. The jury also heard evidence from experts and non-police witnesses. They were asked to reach conclusions on the surveillance and police operation, the hard stop itself, and the vital questions about whether Mark Duggan was armed when he was shot, and whether he had been killed unlawfully. One of the central questions was whether or not the firearms officer who fired the fatal shot, known as V53, had actually fired in self-defense as he had claimed. Another officer, W70, also testified that he had seen Mark Duggan holding a gun. However, questions were raised about this account. None of the other witnesses claimed to have seen a gun in his hand. V53 described in detail what he called a freeze-frame moment. As he's turned to face me, he had an object in his right hand. Mark Duggan is carrying a handgun in his right hand. You can make out the shape outline of it, the handle of it, the barrel. You can make out the trigger guard, not visually, but again, if you imagine it as an L shape, the sock, there's a little bit of a give in it, so that's when the trigger guard would have been. Significantly, despite being trained to follow the gun, none of the police officers said they saw it go flying through the air on a clear summer's evening. Expert evidence from pathologists and Professor James Clasper, an expert in bioengineering, considered it was not credible that Mark threw the gun after having been shot. Nor could any involuntary movement have accounted for the gun ending up 5 meters away from where he fell. Nor did the forensic evidence positively support the account that a gun was in Mark Duggan's hand when V53 fired at him. No gunshot residue was found on the gun or sock, despite Mark Duggan's clothes and face being covered with it. Neither was any of the forensic evidence to suggest he had opened the shoebox or touched the gun or sock. There were 2 civilian witnesses to the shooting. One of them, witness B, said he saw what was definitely a phone in Mark Duggan's hand. He described seeing him look baffled with his hands up in the air as if surrendering, attempting to run, and described seeing a shiny Blackberry in his right hand. The other civilian witness was the taxi driver. He stated he did not see Mark Duggan open or close the shoebox during the journey, and that he had a good view of him when he left the minicab. He did not see him with anything in his hands, raising his arms or making any threatening movement towards the police. V53 also claimed that it was the first shot that penetrated Mark Duggan's chest, the fatal shot. He claimed that Mr. Duggan then swung towards him, pointing the gun directly at him, and then the second shot was fired, hitting his bicep. However, expert evidence also raised questions about the aspect of the account. Pathologist Derek Pounder was of the opinion that V53 had got the order of the shots wrong, and that the non-lethal arm shot had come first, then the fatal shot to the chest. The other pathologist, Simon Paul, maintained it was impossible to tell. However, the pathologist and Professor Jonathan Clasper, the bioengineering expert, agreed that the bullet wounds on the arm suggested that the upper arm would have been rotated towards the body when the arm shot was sustained, rather than pointing outwards towards V53. The expert also agreed that the chest wound demonstrated that Mark Duggan wasn't in an upright position when he sustained it, but bent forwards. The arm shot wound, on the other hand, was consistent of being upright. Taken together, the lawyers for Mark Duggan's family suggested these insights indicated that Mark had been shot in the arm, staggered forward, and was then shot in the chest. Firearm officers claiming to have found the gun, known as R31, said he found it in the bushes around 5 meters from the spot where Mark Duggan had been shot dead. Z51, the most senior officer on the scene, also testified to having found the gun. Questions were raised by the family's legal team about the accounts given by the officers about finding the gun, as they did not appear to be consistent with video footage provided by witness B, known as the BBC footage. V59, the firearms team leader, gave several statements and initial evidence at the inquest that stated that he had directed another officer, R31, to look for the firearm. According to V59, R31 returned and told him he had found it on the grass. Subsequently, armed response vehicle ARV officers had arrived, whom V59 had directed to go and secure the gun. All 3 ARV officers gave evidence to the same effect. However, this version of events was contradicted by the video evidence that showed that when the ARV officers arrived and were apparently directed to secure the gun, actually the gun had not yet been found by R31 or by Z51. V59 was later recalled to the court to account for this discrepancy and claimed he had got it chronologically wrong. This would have meant that all 3 ARV officers' evidence was also wrong. Leslie Thomas, a barrister for the Duggam family, suggested that the gun had been planted, and that was why V59 apparently informed the ARV officers to secure the gun before it had been found. The judge noted during his summing up that this was not a simple mistake, but a direct contradiction, a stark problem. Police statements raised concerns about the possibility of collusion. The initial statements made by the police on the evening of the 4th of August were very sparse. Full statements were provided several days later on the 7th of August. Important details did not appear in these later statements. For example, the finding of the gun in the bushes and the specific number of shots that had been fired. W70's claim that he saw Mark Duggan raising a gun, a crucial piece of evidence, was not mentioned in his initial report but appeared in his second report. When asked whether this was a deliberate omission during the trial of Hutchinson-Foster, W70 said, "I don't know." At an inquest, police officers also described how these longer statements were written over a course of 8 hours, as officers sat together in a briefing room at their Lehman Street base, with a flip chart at the front of the room, V59 said. "We did them in segments. As you finished your section, you then left the room, got a cup of coffee and had a comfort break, etc. When everybody had finished their section 4, for example, on the 3rd of August, we all came back into that room together and went through the flip chart process, wrote the next section, and we all wrote that." The officer said they had agreed on details such as times, places, locations, postings, sequence of events, but denied they had discussed the actual shooting or their honestly held beliefs about it. When questioned about why they had omitted important information from initial statements, officers said they were deliberately briefed and insisted that their statements had been made in line with the Association of Chief Police Officers ACPO guidance. The IPCC did not have a staff member present at the statement writing because there were no resources available, according to the IPCC Deputy Senior Investigator Colin Sparrow, which was reported in the Telegraph on the 28th of September 2012. Following the inquest, Pamela Duggan began court proceedings into judicially reviewing the ACPO guidance. In March 2014, the Court of Appeal denied the challenge could go ahead. There were further concerns raised about the IPCC's handling of the investigation. During the Kelvin Hutchinson-Foster trial, the IPCC's Colin Sparrow said he failed to grasp the significance of the shoebox that contained the gun until a week after the shooting. By the time he was told about the shoebox, he admitted the minicab had been taken to a police car pound and security seals on the car had been broken. Another IPCC investigator told the court that he had discovered the shoebox had been moved within the vehicle, apparently during searches. The minicab had been moved from the scene the day after the shooting and was returned there that day, before being removed for a final time that night, a process which the recovery driver said was very unusual. The IPCC was also criticised for ignoring the possibility that the gun could have been planted by police officers. 2 civilian witnesses, Miss J and her daughter, gave evidence at the inquest that they had seen an officer moving a gun from the minicab in the immediate aftermath of the shooting. But the IPCC, despite being given this evidence early on in its investigation, chose not to explore it further. Even more troubling was, according to Stafford Scott, the community advisor group to the IPCC, he was told that 3 police officers had given statements saying that they had seen an officer throwing a gun away. These police statements were later denied. Even after the long inquest, the legal wrangling, and the ongoing attention the case has attracted, the family and the Justice for Mark Duggan's campaign face further struggles for the full answers. The 2011 England Riots, more widely known as the London Riots, were a series of riots between the 6th and 11th of August 2011. Thousands of people rioted in cities and towns across England, which saw looting and arson, as well as mass deployment of police and the deaths of 5 people. The protests started in Tottenham, London, following the death of Mark Duggan, a local man who was shot dead by the police on the 4th of August. Several violent clashes with police followed Mr. Duggan's death, along with the destruction of police vehicles, a double-decker bus, and many homes and businesses, which rapidly gained the attention of the media. Overnight, looting took place in Tottenham Retail Park and in nearby Wood Green. The following days saw similar scenes in other parts of London, with the worst rioting taking place in Hackney, Brixton, Wolverstone, Wandsworth, Peckham, Enfield, Battersea, Croydon, Ealing, Barking, Woolwich, Lewisham and East Ham. From the 8th to the 11th of August, other towns and cities in England, including Birmingham, Bristol, Coventry, Derby, Leicester, Liverpool, Manchester and Nottingham, faced what was described by the media as copycat violence, with social media playing a role. By the 10th of August, more than 3,000 arrests had been made across England, with at least 1,984 people issued with criminal charges for various offences relating to the riots. Initially, courts sat for extended hours, A total of 3,443 crimes across London were linked to the disorder. Along with the 5 deaths, at least 16 others were injured as a direct result of the related violent acts. An estimated £200 million worth of property damage was incurred, and local economic activity, which in many cases was already struggling due to the 2008 recession, was significantly compromised. Significant debate was generated amongst political, social and academic figures about the causes and context of the riots. Attributions for the rioters' behaviour included social factors such as racial tension, class tension, economic decline, and its consequent unemployment. The peaceful march on behalf of the death of Mark Duggan, which took place on the morning of Saturday the 6th of August in Tottenham, was followed by rioting and looting. First in Tottenham and later in Tottenham Hale Retail Park. Rioting occurred shortly after about 120 people marched from the Broadwater Farm estate to Tottenham police station via the High Road. The spread of news and rumours about the previous evening's disturbances in Tottenham sparked riots during the night of the 7th of August in the London districts of Brixton, Enfield, Islington and Wood Green, and in Oxford Circus in the centre of London. In the evening of Monday the 8th of August, many areas of London were affected by widespread looting, arson and violence. There were significant outbreaks in parts of Battersea, Brixton, Bromley, Camden, Croydon, Ealing, East Ham, Hackney, Harrow, Lewisham, Peckham, Stratford, Tower Hamlets, Waltham Forest, Wandsworth, Woolwich and Wood Green. A man was found shot in Croydon and died later in hospital. Another man who had been assaulted in Ealing died in hospital on Thursday the 11th of August. Similar riots were reported outside London, most notably in Manchester, Birmingham, Nottingham, Wolverhampton, Liverpool and Bristol. There were reports of unrest on a smaller scale in other parts of the country, including Gillingham and Derby. Following a greatly increased police presence, London was quiet on Tuesday the 9th of August, but rioting continued in Nottingham and Birmingham, where, according to the police account, 11 shots were fired at the police, including at a police helicopter, and petrol bombs were thrown at officers, and spread to Leicester and parts of the West Midlands, and to parts of Greater Manchester and Merseyside in the northwest of England. On the 10th of August, London remained quiet whilst hundreds of arrests were being made by the police. 3 men were killed in Birmingham in a hit-and-run incident related to the disturbances. Looting and violence continued in 2 locations around Manchester and Liverpool. The existence of social media made the 2011 riots unparalleled to any before them in terms of the speed at which the issues managed to spread and at which the rioters were able to mobilise and organise. Many used sites such as Facebook and Twitter to promote and advertise sites for looting and disorder. As a result, many online organisers were handed severe sentences for their roles in the violence. Throughout the rioting, many of the rioters failed to cover their faces. Some posed for pictures with stolen goods, posting them on social networking sites. Although London employs CCTV cameras to monitor crime and large events, reports indicate that citizens' footage contributed more to capturing looters in action than the police force. Beyond the CCTV, looters were filmed and photographed with their faces visible. Police forces and investigators use websites like Flickr to find galleries of the looters to help solve and prevent cases of vandalism and further damage. Facebook pages were also created to identify looters. Several interactive maps were implemented in the Google Maps website that showed satellite views of what was happening in the streets during the rioting. James Cridland, the managing director of the Free Media Resources, created a Google map that tracked verified locations of rioting. Channel 4 News also has similar maps that progressively tracked the damage in the streets as well. News channels also were able to utilise this public service to capture live footage on the streets and inform citizens of dangerous or crowded areas. There were reports that the Blackberry Messenger (BBM) service was used by looters to organise their activities, and that inflammatory and inaccurate accounts of Mark Duggan's killing on social media sites may have incited disturbances. One of the many messages shared between users was the following: "Everyone in Edmonton, Enfield, Wood Green, everywhere in North, link up at Enfield Town Station at 4 o'clock sharp." It began, "Start leaving your yards and linking up with your mates. Forget the feds. Bring your ballies and your bags, trolleys, car, vans, hammers, the lot." Research in Motion assisted British police in tracking rioters who used the BBM, stating, "We comply with the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and cooperate fully with the Home Office and UK police forces." Increased connectivity amongst individuals led to greater ability to organise and execute massive gatherings. This was not only occurred during the riots in England, but with other collective gatherings such as the Arab Spring and the Egyptian Revolution of 2011. Much like BBM, activity on social media shaped the London riots. During the Tottenham riots of 1985, citizens had to head to the public place to voice their message. Yet with access to Twitter as a communication medium, social media was used to rapidly spread the message of the riots. On Radio 4, a police official said social media was used to organise and create greed and criminality. The Daily Telegraph described Twitter as being an outlet for promoting gang violence. Evidence showed that Twitter is powerful because tweets of individuals were inspired by news content. However, an article in Time magazine suggested that Blackberry Messenger was more to blame. During the riots, Twitter accounted for 4 out of every 170 UK internet visits on Monday the 8th of August. In addition, citizens also used Twitter to band together after the destruction with hashtags including #RiotCleanup. Evidence showed that people were tweeting and retweeting news related to the riots, which were not original content. Other than Blackberry Messenger and social networking sites, mobile phone operator T-Mobile and Orange prioritized police requests for information about phones that were used to plan the riots that hit British cities. Under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, phone companies were required to hand over data about the location of calls which were made from the owners of the phones and a list of calls made to and from a particular handset. Trevor Ellis, a 26-year-old man from Brixton Hill, was shot dead in Croydon, South London on the 8th of August. His family denied reports that Mr. Ellis, who had come from the Brixton area to Croydon with a group of friends, had been involved in looting. 13 people were arrested in connection with the murder. All were later bailed and then released without action. On the 16th of December, the eve of Mr. Ellis's birthday, detectives opened a fresh appeal into the murder, asking for any witnesses to come forward. On the 10th of August in Winston Green, Birmingham, 3 men, Haroon Jahan, who was 21, and brothers Shazad Ali, who was 30, and Abdul Musiva, who was 31, were killed in a hit-and-run incident whilst attempting to protect their neighbourhood from rioters and looters. On the 19th of April 2012, 8 men, each indicted on 3 counts of murder, were tried at Birmingham Crown Court before Mr. Justice Flux. The jury acquitted all the defendants on all charges. A 68-year-old man, Richard Mannington Bowes, died on the 11th of August after he was attacked whilst attempting to stamp out a litter bin of fire on the evening of August the 8th. The attacker inflicted severe head injuries which resulted in a coma. The assault was caught on CCTV and reportedly filmed on mobile phones by associates of the alleged assailant. The attack on Mr. Bowes was witnessed by several police officers, but due to the number of rioters, they were unable to come to his aid until riot squad officers pushed back other rioters while being attacked to reach Mr. Bowes. A line of officers then held back the rioters as paramedics arrived. Mr. Bowes' wallet and phone had been stolen, and police faced difficulty in identifying him. He died of his injuries at St. Mary's Hospital on the 11th of August 2011, after being removed from life support. Many tributes were paid to Mr. Bowes, including Ealing Council, who flew the Union flag at half-mast over its town hall and announced the launch of a relief fund in his name, and the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, who described him as a hero. 16-year-old Darrell D'Souza of Hounslow was charged with the murder of Mr. Bowes, violent disorder and 4 burglaries. He appeared at Croydon Magistrates Court on the 16th of August 2011, where he was remanded in custody until his appearance at the Central Criminal Court on the 18th of August 2011. His 31-year-old mother, Lavina D'Souza, was charged with perverting the course of justice. On the 12th of March 2012, at the Inner London Crown Court, Darrell D'Souza pleaded guilty to manslaughter after previously pleading guilty to burglary and violent disorder. The following day, the Crown withdrew the murder charge against him. After a trial at the Inner London Crown Court before Mr. Justice Saunders and a jury, Lavina D'Souza was convicted of perverting the course of justice after she destroyed the clothing of her son wore that day of Mr. Bowes' death. On the 17th of April 2012, Mr. Justice Saunders sentenced Darrell D'Souza to a detention for a term of 8 years and Lavina D'Souza to imprisonment for 18 months. In London, between Monday afternoon and the early hours of Tuesday, 14 people were injured by rioters. These included a 75-year-old woman who suffered a broken hip in Hackney. In Barking, East London, 20-year-old Malaysian student Ashraf Haziq was beaten and then robbed twice by looters, emptying his rucksack. Footage of the second mugging, which appears to show the second set of muggers pretend to help him and then proceed to ransack his rucksack, was uploaded to YouTube. He suffered a broken jaw requiring surgery. On the 2nd of March 2012, 2 men, John Kafunda of Ilford and Rhys Donovan of Romford, were found guilty of the robbery and also violent disorder by a jury at Wood Green Crown Court. The convictions were quashed by the Court of Appeal on the 29th of November 2012. In Chingford, East London, 3 police officers were hit by a car used as a getaway vehicle by a group who had looted the Aristocrat store on Chingford Mount Road. 2 of the officers were seriously injured and taken to hospital. In total, 186 police officers were injured, as well as 3 police community support officers. 5 police dogs were also reportedly injured. 10 firefighters were injured, as the London Fire Brigade dealt with 100 serious fires caused by the disturbances. The LFB also reported 8 of its fire appliances had their windscreens smashed and 2 fire cars were attacked. Vehicles, homes and shops were attacked and set alight. At least 100 families are thought to have been made homeless by arson and looting. Shopkeepers estimated the damages in their Tottenham Hale and Tottenham branches at several £million. The riots caused the irretrievable loss of heritage architecture. It was estimated that the retailers lost at least 30,000 hours of trading time. The Association of British Insurers said that they expected the industry to pay out in excess of £200 million. Estimated losses in London were indicated to be in the region of £100 million. On the 8th of August 2011, a Sony DADC warehouse in Enfield at Enfield Lock, which also acted as the primary distribution centre for independent music distributor PIAS Entertainment Group, was destroyed by a fire. Initially, because millions of items of stock were lost, including most of the PISA's inventory, it was thought that long-term damage to the British independent music industry might result. On the 18th of August 2011, PIAS confirmed that their operations were back to normal. On the 11th of August 2011, London police reported that they had arrested 3 teenagers in connection with the warehouse fire. The Financial Times reported that an analysis showed that 48,000 local businesses, shops, restaurants, pubs and clubs had suffered financial losses as a result of the looting and rioting in English streets. According to the BBC News, a total of 2,584 businesses were attacked and looted, 231 homes were targeted for burglaries and vandals, and 664 people were robbed and injured. A 20-year-old student, Ashraf Haziq, was attacked while cycling along Queen's Road in Barking. The prosecution said that the victim was punched in the face by one of the group of 100 youths. His bike, a PlayStation Portable, and a mobile phone were stolen. In September 2011, an accusation of robbery was made against 24-year-old Reese Donovan. The same month, a 17-year-old Bu Izagaba was accused and in February 2012 convicted of breaking the victim's jaw with an unprovoked punch. In February 2012, John Kafunda and Reese Donovan were convicted of stealing from Rossley after being identified on camera pretending to help him. Sony offered to replace his PSP after the video of the attack became popular, and Namco Bandai sent him a package of games. Four London buses were set on fire during the riots, two of which were completely destroyed. One suffered serious damage but was subsequently repaired, and one suffered less serious damage and was also repaired, and the other buses suffered broken windows and other minor damage. On the 9th of August, Croydon's tramlink was partly shut down due to damage inflicted along its route. Transport of London, London Overground and London Underground shut Barking, Peckham Rye and Harrow-on-the-Hill and Hackney Central stations. The train operating company Southern later announced that trains were stopping at many stations in South London. National Express coaches stopped serving Wolverhampton and suburban stops in the Birmingham area, but not Birmingham coach station itself, and Manchester, but not Manchester Airport. Five Football League Cup games, due to be played on the 9th of 10th of August, were postponed after requests from the police due to the riots. The games at Bristol City, Bristol Rovers, Charleston Athletic, Crystal Palace and West Ham United were all postponed, as they were all situated within a short distance of areas which had seen some of the worst disturbances. There was also uncertainty as to the third Test cricket match between India and England at Edgbaston in Birmingham, but the match was played. The international football friendly between England and the Netherlands at Wembley Stadium, due to take place on the 10th of August, was cancelled, as well as the international friendly between Ghana and Nigeria, scheduled for the 9th of August at Vicarage Road, Watford. Tottenham Hotspur's opening game of the 2011-2012 Premiership League season against Everton on the 13th of August was also postponed. The League 2 game between Cheltenham Town and Swindon Town, due to be played the same day, was also initially postponed until further consultation allowed Gloucestershire Police to provide the required resources. Following the initial disorder in Tottenham, the constituency Labour MP David Lammy appealed for calm, saying that true justice can only follow through investigation of facts and that Tottenham had its heart ripped out by the riots. He said that the rioters were not representative of the local community as a whole and insisted that the Independent Police Complaints Commission must fully establish the circumstances of Mark Duggan's death. Mr. Lammy voiced concerns that the EDL and BNP were playing on the London riots and people's fears to advance their political motives. Streatham's Labour MP, Chuka Amuna, commended the violence in Brixton and Tottenham and called for Blackberry Messenger service used by some of the rioters to coordinate their activities to be temporarily disabled between 6 PM and 6 AM. The use of Blackberry Messenger to encourage violent disorders led to arrests. A Colchester man was detained under a Serious Crime Act. John Randall, the Conservative MP for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, said, "It's a small minority of people causing the trouble. The events in Ealing brought it home. It's just down the road from Uxbridge Road." Hackney North and Stoke Newington MP Diane Abbott called for an introduction of a curfew. Newark MP Colonel Patrick Mercer called for the deployment of a water cannon. In December 2010, Theresa May, the Home Secretary, has said that the deployment of a water cannon by police forces on British mainland was an operational decision which had been resisted until now by senior police officers. On the 9th of August 2011, Miss May rejected their use and said, "The way we police in Britain is not through the use of water cannon. The way we police in Britain is through the consent of communities." Ken Livingstone, the former London mayor, said, "The issue of water cannons would be very useful given that the level of arson we are seeing here." Scotland Yard said officers did not have any water cannon, and if their use was approved, they would have to be brought over from Northern Ireland. Miss May said, "I condemn utterly the violence in Tottenham. Such disregard for public safety and property will not be tolerated, and the Metropolitan Police have my full support in restoring order." She returned to the UK from holiday early to meet with senior police officials on August the 8th. A spokesman for the Prime Minister's office also added, "The rioting in Tottenham last night was utterly unacceptable. There is no justification for the aggression the police and the public faced, or the damage to property." The Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, said that the riots were completely unacceptable and described the violence as needless and opportunistic. London's Mayor Boris Johnson, who cut short a holiday in Canada to return to the UK on the 9th of August, said, "I'm appalled at the scenes of violence and destruction in Tottenham," whilst his deputy, Kit Malthouse, told Sky News reporter that criminal elements were to blame for the trouble. Prime Minister David Cameron commended the terrible scenes of people looting, vandalising, thieving, robbing, and told the rioters, "You will feel the full force of the law. And if you are old enough to commit these crimes, you are old enough to face the punishment." Croydon Central MP Gavin Barwell called the damage caused in the London Borough of Croydon sickening, in a strongly worded criticism of what he deems as a misplaced hypersensitivity about race, dating back to the Macpherson report of 1999. Civitas director David Green attributed the reluctance of the police to use force to a fear of disciplinary action. He said that the officers in charge of handling a riot think it's safer to wait for orders from the top. In a public speech on the 15th of August, David Cameron blamed a broken society in a moral collapse. Broad societal change themes common to his party's election campaign theme, Broken Britain. The city councils of Manchester and Salford were reported to be investigating their powers for ways of evicting tenants if they or their children had been involved in the violence or looting in their cities. The London Borough of Greenwich also stated on its website, "We shall seek the eviction of anyone living in council property if they are found to have been engaged in criminal acts." Several countries issued warnings advising caution to travellers visiting the United Kingdom during the riots. Khalid Kane, the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Gaddafi government in Libya, called on Mr Cameron to resign over the riots, stating that Cameron has lost all legitimacy and must go. He also called for an international intervention into the UK against Mr Cameron and accused Mr Cameron of using Irish and Scottish mercenaries against rioters, mocking Mr Cameron's comments on Gaddafi during the first Libyan civil war that year. In 2012, the Syrian ambassador to the UN, Bashar Jafari, compared the situation and the government response of the Syrian uprising to that of the 2011 English riots. The riots were described by one journalist as the worst disturbances of their kind since the 1995 Brixton riots. Commentators likened the riots to the Broadwater Farm riot of 1985, during which a police officer, Keith Blakelock, was murdered. The disturbances were preceded by calls for better oversight of the Metropolitan Police, repeating observations which go back to the death of Stephen Lawrence and the New Cross fire. In April 2011, there was a large non-violent march to Scotland Yard as a result of the death of Smiley Culture. The very widespread scale of the violence prompted comparisons with the Gordon riots of 1780. The Daily Telegraph's editorial said, "What we have experienced in London and elsewhere since Saturday night is a wholly new phenomenon. Violent disorder whose sole intent is criminal. In such circumstances, there can only be one response if the law-abiding majority is to be protected. The thugs must be taught to respect the law of the land the hard way. The Telegraph also reported Tottenham riots. Police let gangs run riot and loot. Britain's biggest police force is facing criticism after it let looters run riot in North London for almost 12 hours. The Guardian called for the public to back the police. Britain's 2011 riots have become a defining contest between disorder and order. In that contest, important caveats notwithstanding, there is only one right side to be on. The attacks, the destruction, the criminality, and the reign of fear must be stopped. The rule of the law in the cities of Britain must not only be defended against delinquent destruction, it must also be enforced. During the heights of the riots, The Guardian was accused of anti-Semitic incitement by the Media Monitoring Organisation. Comment is free to watch CIFW after Guardian journalist Paul Lewis singled out Hasidic Jewish residents who were not involved in the rioting. The content of his report stated, the makeup of the rioters was racially mixed. Most were men or boys, some apparently as young as 10, but families and other local residents, including some from Tottenham's Hasidic Jewish community, also gathered to watch and cheer at the police. CIFW responded by commending the newspaper, saying, a 1,800 word Guardian report doesn't mention the race, ethnicity, or religion of the rioters, but somehow found it pertinent to note that some of those who gathered to jeer the police were allegedly Hasidic Jews. As a result of the negative publicity, The Guardian revised the story. In its 9th of August leading article, The Independent said the police handling of Mark Duggan's death looked to have been poor, and that there is context of mistrust of the police here. The paper added that it is spurious to draw a connection between that disaffection by the inner city youth and specific outbreaks of violence of the sort we have seen in the recent days. Psychiatrist Theodore Dalrymple wrote an opinion piece for the New York Daily News in which he blamed a sense of entitlement that he sees being common amongst Britain's youth and a cause for the riots. He said that British youth are today among the most unpleasant and violent in the world as a result. Some journalists made comparisons between these riots and the 2005 riots in France. In both cases, the unrest started with the death of a young person during a confrontation with the police. In fact, a television report by France 2, broadcast in November 2005, showed a visit by a delegation from Evry, just outside Paris, to Tottenham, with the report calling Tottenham part of London, regularly shaken by riots. In earlier decades where a lot of money was invested and the promotion of ethnic minorities had been made a priority. Writing in Pakistan's Newsline, Mahir Ali likened the government's response to that of Margaret Thatcher's response to the 1981 England Riots. Many people call for the government to urge the police to deploy anti-riot methods often used outside Great Britain, such as water cannons and baton rounds, which have been used in Northern Ireland, the use of which has been long resisted by senior police commanders and politicians. Pauline Pierce, a 45-year-old woman from Hackney, was filmed close to the rioting, furiously chastising looters over their criminal behaviour. She is seen holding a walking stick and gesturing. The resulting video subsequently went viral. Its rapid spread was helped by tweeting from famous people such as newspaper editor Piers Morgan.
That they work hard to start their business. You understand? Poor Auntie Patty's shop there. She's working hard to make her business work. And then you lot want to go and burn it up for what? Just to say that you're warring and you're bad man. This is about a man who got shot in Tottenham. This ain't about having fun on the road and busting up the place. Get it real, black people. Get real. In the middle. Do it for a cause. If we're fighting for a cause, let's fight for a cause. You lot me the off. I'm ashamed to be a Hackney person. Because we're not all gathering together and fighting for a cause. We're running down Foot Locker and TV Shoe. Dirty teeth or not.
Miss Pierce was hailed as a heroine for helping to ease tensions in Hackney. Her influence was acknowledged by politicians and national press. MP for Hackney South and Shoreditch, Meg Hillier, has invited Miss Pearce to the House of the Parliament. Speaking to the Australian newspaper, Miss Pearce described the looting and vandalism as being heartbreaking, and also contrasted people's relative poverty with expenditure for the Olympic Games. Miss Pearce has been since featured in The Spectator, dismissing David Starkey's view that hip-hop culture was partly to blame for the riots. In September 2011, she was awarded the Team of London Award at the annual Peace Awards by Boris Johnson. On Amazon, sales of baseball bats and truncheons increased significantly overnight. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Stephen Kavanagh stated, "We are already seeing a community kickback. People are angry. This is their neighbourhoods that are at stake." Political commentator and foreign affairs analyst Niall Gardiner suggested that the British government should prompt a debate which would allow British business owners the right to keep and bear arms. 3 men killed in a hit-and-run incident in Birmingham, Haroon Jahan, Shahad Ali and Abdul Musiva Tariq, were described as heroes for dying whilst attempting to defend their neighbourhood. Tariq Jahan, the father of the 20-year-old victim Haroon, gave a speech appealing for calm, social unity and to end the violence hours after his son's death.
Last night we lost 3 cherished members of our community. They were taken from us in a way that no father, mother, sister, brother should have to endure. Today we stand here to plead with all the youth to remain calm, for our communities to stand united. As we stand here today, this is not a race issue. The family has received messages of sympathy and support from all parts of the community, all faiths, all colours and backgrounds. Please respect the memory of our sons and the grief of our family and loved ones by staying away from trouble and not going out tonight. Basically, I lost my son. Blacks, Asians, whites, we all live in the same community. Why do we have to kill one another? What started these riots and what's escalated? Why are we doing this? I lost my son. Step forward if you want to lose your sons. Otherwise, calm down and go home. Please. And last, to all those people who were there when the incident took place, I was there too. I know who you guys are. Please come forward. I need witnesses to prove that my son was innocent and the 2 other chaps that died with him for no reason. Please, I beg you, come forward. You guys know me, I know you. We were all there together. Please come forward. Thank you very much.
Jahan was hailed as a hero and a patriot for helping to ease tensions in Birmingham. His influence was acknowledged by politicians and the national press, receiving him an award at the 2011 Pride of Britain's Award. Conservative MEP Daniel Hanahan said of him, "Uncomplaining in the control of his emotions, Tariq Jahan reminds us of what it means to be British." The Financial Times described Mr. Jahan as eloquent and inspiring, and said his selfless intervention contrasted with the rapacious self-interest of the looters and was a timely reminder of the obligations of the community. Tens of thousands of users of social networking sites coordinated clean-up operations of their local shopping areas and streets. Some of these groups began being referred to as riot wombles, taking up brooms and other tools to clear the streets of debris and wreckage, a term that was later used by Prime Minister David Cameron during the speech on the aftermath of the riots of the 15th of August 2011. Social media sites Twitter and Facebook were also used for reporting information on the riots and to coordinate a voluntary citizens' operation to clear out the riot-hit areas. In Clapham Junction, dozens of volunteers carrying brooms turned out to assist with the cleanup efforts. On Facebook, over 900,000 people joined a group entitled Supporting the Met Police Against the London Rioters. Manchester City Councillor Pat Carney, the city centre spokesperson for Manchester City Council, said, "The true Mancunian civic spirit has been shown in Manchester today. Staff from the city centre businesses and Manchester Metropolitan University joined the volunteers as food outlets gave out free drinks and snacks. There were several fundraising initiatives to help independent business owners rebuild their businesses and livelihoods. a petition was submitted to the UK government proposing that any convicted rioters had their benefit payments cut. The petition had been signed by over 200,000 people. A petition on the UK government's website demanding convicted rioters to be banished to the Outer Hebrides of Scotland was set up in the summer of 2011. The reaction caused a public outcry in Scotland, and eventually Westminster offered an apology to the Western Isles MP Agnes Brendan MacNeil. By 8 PM on the 7th of August, the major rioting had spread to Wood Green, but some riot police were on hand. Again, the police did not intervene to stop the looting. The mostly Turkish and Kurdish shop owners along Wood Green, Turnpike Lane and Greens Lanes, Haringey, were said to have formed a local protection unit around their shop. On the 8th and 9th of August, people from the Indian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Kurdish, Turkish, Sikh and English communities chased down mass youths in several areas of North and East London, including Green Street, Hackney, Haringey and Tower Hamlets. Conservative MEP Daniel Hanahan praised the community for their brave and responsible reactions to the crisis. On the 9th of August, vigilantes assembled in Enfield, including several members of the English Defence League, locals and supporters of Millwall FC in Eltham, and the Sikh communities in Southall, East Ham, Ilford and Romford. Sangat TV, a Sikh channel, urged their viewers to protect Sikh temples after a report that one was attacked in Birmingham. On the night of the 9th and 10th of August 2011, following violence, arson and rioting in London, members of the Sikh community in Southall volunteered to stand guard at various city gurdwaras, with as many as 200 to 300 Sikhs from different age groups gathered in various gurudwaras across Southall to safeguard their place of worship from rioters, some armed with swords and hockey sticks. The Sikh drew praise from Prime Minister David Cameron for this action. On the 10th of August in Eltham, police clashed with a bottle-throwing crowd of around 200 vigilantes, including many English Defence League members. It was reported that 50 EDL members joined force with the locals to patrol the streets. That same day, a senior police officer said that some vigilante groups were hampering police operations in London. The ethnic makeup of the rioters varied in different cities. 76% of those arrested in Manchester were white, whilst 29% were white and 39% were black in London. And the West Midlands was the only area where more than 6% were Asian. Research conducted by the University of Nottingham suggested that race relations in Britain deteriorated in the period following the riots, and that the prejudice towards ethnic minorities increased after the hit-and-run incident in Birmingham, in which 3 Asian men were killed by a black driver. Racial tensions between blacks and Asians in Birmingham increased. Hostilities were diffused by public appeals for an end to the violence by Tariq Jahan, the father of one of the victims. The effects of black culture were discussed by historian David Starkey in the edition of BBC's Newsnight programme on the 12th of August. Mr. Starkey singled out an influence of black gangster and rap culture on youths of all races, contrasting contemporary youth patois with the speech patterns of black Tottenham MP David Lammy, who Mr. Starkey asserted sounded white. The author, Dredder Say Mitchell, countered this argument by saying there is no one single black culture. Some commentators remarked on the apparently high proportion of black people involved in the riots, and took the view that there was a disproportionately high number of rioters who were black, compared to the overall demographics of the United Kingdom. As the Ministry of Justice had admitted, the group of people brought before the courts is only a subset of all the people who took part in the public disorder. In February 2012, a report was published by the Ministry of Justice providing demographic statistics of the people charged over participation of the riots up to the 1st of February 2012, which revealed that 41% of those brought before the courts identified themselves as being from the white group, 39% from the black ethnic group, 12% from the mixed ethnic group, 6% from the Asian ethnic group, and 2% from other ethnic groups. These figures were disproportionate to the average UK population. However, the figures revealed varying demographics in different areas when compared to local populations. For example, in Haringey, the figures revealed that 55% of defendants in the court over riot-related charges were black, compared to a 17% black population. In Salford, 94% of the rioters in court were white, compared to an 88% white population, and 6% of the rioters were black, compared to the 2% black population. Additionally, looters from 44 foreign countries were jailed, with Jamaicans representing the largest group. The Ministry of Justice report also noted that rioters brought before the courts were disproportionately male, 89%, and young, 53%, were aged 20 or under, with the number of juveniles ranging from 26% in London and 39% in Merseyside, and very few listed as over 40. The Metropolitan Police launched Operation Wyvern, an investigation into the events leading up to and during the riots. The operation was initially led by Detective Superintendent John Sweeney of the Metropolitan Police, with detectives from the Homicide and Serious Crime Command, specialist investigators from the Public Order Branch, and police support staff. Detective Superintendent Robin Bahrain took over the post-event investigation, where officers were drawn from all over the MPS, from different business groups, and placed into 10 investigation hubs across London. Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Steve Kavanagh, stated that the number of officers deployed tripled between the 6th and 7th of August. The BBC reported that West Midlands riot police were issued with plastic bullets to use against looters, but that none were fired. Metropolitan Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner Steve Kavanagh confirmed that police in London were considering using baton rounds against the rioters, not previously used by mainland police in public order operations, though they were first approved for use in England and Wales in 2001. The Metropolitan Police assigned 450 detectives to hunt for rioters and looters. The list of photographed looters was made available on their website. Assistant Chief Constable Jerry Shewan of Greater Manchester Police criticised unprecedented criminality. On the 10th of August, he warned, "Hundreds and hundreds of people, we have your image, we have your face, we have your act of wanton criminality on film. Research in Motion, RIM, the maker of Blackberry, are reported to have contacted the police to offer help in investigating the use of their system for the organisation of riots." According to The Independent, the cost to the Metropolitan Police of policing the disorder and disturbances in London were expected to exceed £34 million. This would have been more than their total bill for policing of all major public disorder events in the year from April 2010 to March 2011. By the 15th of August 2011, around 3,100 people had been arrested, of whom 1,100 had appeared in court. On the 25th of August, the BBC reported that more than 2,000 people had been arrested in connection with the disorder in London. It was reported in mid-August that some courts were advised by senior justice clerks to deal harshly with offences committed during the disturbances. The advice was said to tell the courts that they could ignore existing sentencing guidelines and hand down heavy sentences. David Cameron defended the courts for handing out tough sentences, while some Liberal Democrat MPs and civil rights groups criticised some of the sentences being handed down. Groups of lawyers complained that the Crown prosecutors were opposing bail in more cases than usual. Empirical evidence suggested tougher sentences reduced riot-related offences, but that non-riot offences increased. On the 1st of September 2011, the BBC reported that the official Ministry of Justice figures showed that of 1,566 people that had appeared before the magistrates on charges connected with the disorder, 1,027 had been from London, 190 in Greater Manchester, and 132 in the West Midlands, 67 in Merseyside, and 64 in Nottingham. Sentences of 4 years in a young offenders institution were given to 2 males who promoted riots via Facebook. The proposed events in Northwich and Warrington were not attended by any other people. These sentences were affirmed on the appeal by the Court of Appeal. Giving the judgment of the court, the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales, Lord Judge, sitting with Sir John Thomas and Lord Justice Leveson, stated that there is an overwhelming obligation on sentencing courts to do what they can to ensure the protection of the public, that the imposition of severe sentences intended to provide both punishment and deterrent must follow, and that those who deliberately participate in the disturbances of this magnitude, causing injury and damage and fear to even the most stout-hearted citizens, and who individually commit further crimes during the course of the riots, are committed aggravated crimes. The appeals were dismissed. On the 25th of April 2012, the Court of Appeal, Lord Judge C.J. Openshaw and Irwin J.J. increased the sentence imposed by the Inner London Crown Court on Adam Ahmadazi from 4 years detention to 7 years detention for offences of violent disorder, robbery, burglary and criminal damage committed during the riots on the 8th of August 2011, after a reference from Attorney General Dominic Grieve QC. The Lord Chief Justice stated that the offences were of the greatest possible seriousness. A woman who had not taken part in the riots received 5 months for receiving a pair of stolen shorts. The sentence was later reduced on grounds of appeal. Greater Manchester Police used Twitter to celebrate the 5-month sentence. They later apologised and removed the tweet. A teenager was freed when prosecutors found evidence he had been wrongly charged with arson. While in prison, his own flat was burnt down. The detaining of the under 18 without criminal records was criticised by UNICEF in October 2011 for possibly breaching the 1989 UN Convention of Rights of a Child. By August 2012, 1,292 rioters had been handed custodial sentences totaling over 1,800 years and 16.8 months on average. The Tricycle Theatre in Kilburn presented a piece of new writing, The Riots by Gillian Salovo, which looked into the events over the days in August and the thoughts and opinions of a range of people directly involved and politicians. It transferred to the Barney Grant Arts Centre in Tottenham, about 400 metres from where Mark Duggan's protest took place. On the 5th of January 2012, it was due to run until the 15th of January. The piece included community leaders Stafford Scott and Martin Sylvester Brown, police constables on duty that night, and a former resident of the Carpetwright building, the burned remains now providing a remainder of the events. They were combined with the views of Diane Abbott, Ian Duncan Smith, Michael Gove and Pastor Nims Abunji. It was received well by all critics, with 4 stars from The Guardian. Australian mod rock band The Feldons referenced the riots in their song London Town from their 2012 Goody Hallett and Other Stories. The causes of the 2011 riots, both immediate and long term, have been subjected of media and academic debate. Several speculations have emerged as to what was the likely contributory factors which might be for the riots. From socio-economic causes focusing on unemployment and spending cuts, as well as social media, gang culture and criminal opportunism. The House of Commons Home Affairs Select Committee began examining the police response to the riots in late 2011. The then leader of the opposition, Ed Miliband, called for a public inquiry into the wider causes of the riots and has stated that his party would set up such an inquiry if the coalition fails to do so. A wide-ranging LSE study called Reading the Riots concluded that the major contributory factors were opportunism, perceived perceived social justice, deprivation, and frustration at the way communities were policed. A YouGov poll was carried out on the 8th and 9th of August 2011 for The Sun, asking what those surveyed believed to be the main cause of the riots. In it, 42% of those polled for criminal behaviour to be the main cause, whilst 26% thought gang culture was to blame. 8% thought that government cuts were to blame, 5% thought unemployment was to blame, and 5% thought racial tensions were to blame, as well as 3% thinking that poor policing was to blame. In a ComRes poll for the Sunday Mirror and Independent on Sunday, in which the question was, do you agree or disagree with the statements about the recent riots? 90% of those polls agreed that the police should be allowed to use a water cannon to disperse rioters. 90% agreed that there is no excuse whatsoever for the violent rioting and looting over the last few days. 61% agreed that the government ministers failed to return to their desks quickly enough from holiday, and 50% agreed that the government's response to the economic crisis, e.g. cut to services, unemployment, reduced education funding, is helping fuel the rioters. Researchers who study the causes of political instability suggest that the critical common factor is the density of youths. The nation's extent of political unrest, i.e. its vulnerability to riot, war and regime change, is directly associated with the percentage of 15 to 24-year-olds in its population. They argue that communities with more than 20% of individuals in this age group run the greatest risk of more frequent and more intense political instability. They describe the phenomena as the youth bulge theory, where the bulge refers to the fattening of the population pyramid just before the base of the youngest age groups. The riots in Tottenham after the death of Mark Duggan were initially blamed on poor relations between the police and the black community. Professor Gus John has argued that the tactical use of frequent stop and search, particularly amongst young black men, has caused resentment of the police in the black community. According to David Lammy, the MP for Tottenham, the cracks that already existed between the police and the community became deep fissures. The Guardian's reading the riot survey concluded, although rioters expressed a mix of opinions about the disorder, many of those involved said they felt like they were participating in explicitly anti-police riots. They cited policing as the most significant cause of the riot, and anger over the police shooting of Mark Duggan, which triggered initial disturbances in Tottenham, was repeatedly mentioned even outside of London. The rioters themselves cited exclusion as a reason for their actions. One person asked by a journalist if rioting was really the best way to accomplish their objectives. They responded, yes, because if we weren't rioting, you wouldn't be talking to us. Camilla Batman-Galidi, writing in The Independent, blames social exclusion and social deprivation. Various journalists have identified poverty and the growing gap between the rich and poor as causative factors. In a House of Commons debate on the riots, the Home Secretary Theresa May stated that the riots were symptomatic of a wider malaise, including worklessness, illiteracy and drug abuse, but also stated that everybody, no matter what their background or circumstances, has the freedom to choose between right and wrong. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair, writing in The Observer, stated that the riots were not caused by a broken society, but due to a group of young, alienated, disaffected youth who are outside of the social mainstream, who live in a culture at odds with any canons of proper behaviour. He added that this is found virtually in every developed nation. An article from the IWCA dubbed the riots as the Lumpton Rebellion, an example of a neoliberal riot. Max Hastings of the Daily Mail was quoted as blaming young people with an entitlement culture after being bereft of discipline. A journalist on Al Jazeera suggested a similarity to the disenfranchisement behind the Arab Spring revolutionary wave in 2011. Links were made to high youth unemployment and general disenfranchisement. The study by the Financial Times, published in September 2011, found a strong link between rioting and deprivation. Christine Adone, writing in the Daily Telegraph, links the riots to a lack of male role models and argues that, like the overwhelming majority of youth offenders behind bars, these gang members only have one thing in common: no father at home. This has been linked further with England having the worst record in family breakdown in Europe. The spending cuts of the coalition government in the United Kingdom have also been cited as a cause. Ken Livingstone, the Labour candidate for mayor in London in 2012, has argued that the economic stagnation and cuts being imposed by the Tory government inevitably created social division. Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Democrats political party, made it clear that the government's planned cuts to the police budgets will go ahead. The local government's budget had been cut in the past year, so Haringey Council, which includes Tottenham and Tottenham Hale, decided to close 8 of its 13 youth clubs in 2011, rather than save money through increased efficiency or make cuts in other areas. Scrapping of the education maintenance allowance, removing of funding for courses where students already has an equal or lower qualification, and trebling of university tuition fees, combined with high youth unemployment, has placed the British youth between a rock and a hard place, alienating and angering the youth population. Proponents of this argument say that the Scottish youth did not riot partly because the Scottish students do not have to pay tuition fees. David Lammy MP has said that Tottenham has the highest unemployment rate in London and the 8th highest in the United Kingdom. The number of people chasing every one job vacancy in Haringey has been put at 23 and 54 in separate reports, and fears have spread of disorder after youth club closures in recent months. One report about a citizens' inquiry conducted in the aftermath of the violence noted that in Tottenham there was about 10,000 unemployed residents and only 367 job vacancies when the riots broke out. Haringey has the 4th highest level of child poverty in London and 8.8% unemployed. Other academics have pointed to a more prosaic causes of the 2011 riots, citing the carnivalesque atmospheres created through the unusual uses of urban space. For example, researchers from the University of Birmingham noted that another sound could be heard above the melee, that of laughter, above the bark of dogs, and behind the masked and hooded face of the throng were smiles, laughter, and shrieks of joy. In a Newsnight discussion on the 12th of August, historian David Starkey blamed black gangster culture, saying that it had influenced youths of all races. The BBC received nearly 700 complaints about his statement that whites have become black. Cottrell Boyce, writing in the Youth Justice Journal, argued that gangs were constructed as a suitable enemy by politicians and the media, obscuring the wider structural and economic roots of youth violence. During the riots on the 9th of August 2011, UK Home Secretary Theresa May said, "I think this has been about sheer criminality. This is what we have seen on the streets. The violence we've seen, the looting we've seen, the thuggery we've seen. This is all sheer criminality. And let's make no bones about it." Paul Hobbs, London's correspondent for One News, said that the looters are not politically motivated and called the riots recreational violence. A Manchester rioter said to a BBC correspondent, "Every time I go into town, I just think how the shops got smashed up in 2011 by all of us. I just laugh about it every time I go back in there now." The BBC reported that the Chief Constable of the West Midlands Police has stated that he thought that the motivation for the rioters targeting the city centre was not anger but greed. Daily Telegraph columnist Peter Osborne stated that moral decay is just as bad at the top of society as it is at the bottom, with the rich and powerful generating anger amongst the British population. He cited the MP's expensive scandals, bankers' bonuses, and the phone hacking scandal as setting poor examples. In the Financial Times, cartoonist Ingram Pin depicted a Union flag being broken through by a looter in a hoodie carrying a stolen box of Adidas trainers, preceded by two men in suits carrying piles of cash, one saying MP's expenses and another saying bankers' bonuses. Kenneth Clarke, the Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State of Justice, writing in The Guardian, described the riots in part as an outburst of outrageous behaviour by criminal classes. He drew attention to the statistic that almost 3/4 of the adults who had been charged with the offences related to the disorder already had a criminal record. Mr. Clarke characterised this as a legacy of a broken penal system, one that did not have a good record for perverting reoffending. He said that he was proposing radical new measures intending on focusing on a robust punishment and delivering reductions in reoffending. A conference held in November 2012 and its subsequent report by Dr. Leah Bassel of the University of Leicester, entitled Media and the Riots, A Call for Action, examined the relationship between the mainstream media and the communities affected by the riots. It criticised the portrayal of young people in the media coverage, particularly young black people who were disproportionately singled out as being involved. It also criticised the press in spreading misinformation and unreliable sources, and a particular disinformation emanating from the police. In the article Youth Voices in Post-English Riots Tottenham, the role of reflexivity in negotiating negative representations, Elster explores the subjective accounts of a group of 18, 15 to 25-year-olds from Tottenham. This study shows the media portrayals of the communities associated with the riots were unrecognisable to those actually living in those communities. Its findings also indicate a consensus among the research participants, who were all from the riot-hit areas, that the UK general public perceived them, and the wider communities in which they live, through media's riot discourse. As we reach a conclusion of our exploration into the Mark Duggan incident and the subsequent 2011 riots, it's clear this period marked an important chapter in British history. Mr. Duggan's fatal shooting by London police triggered a wave of unrest, touching off a deep vein of social political tension and raising cultural questions about police conduct, racial profiling, and the country's systematic disparities. The death of Mark Duggan, a case that has been fraught with controversies, inconsistencies, and unanswered questions, not only provoked the tumultuous events of the summer of 2011, but has also etched a permanent mark on public consciousness. It was a watershed moment that brought into sharp focus the fragile relationship between the police and the communities, and ignited discourse of law, justice and accountability. The 2011 England Riots, which erupted in the aftermath of Mr. Duggan's death, illuminated the long-seated social and economic tensions lying dormant beneath the surface of Britain's diverse communities. Cities like London, Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester were all scenes of violence, looting and destruction, echoing the frustrations of marginalised communities and the generation's sense of alienation. Yet, amid the violence, there were glimmers of resilience and community spirit. Neighbourhoods pulled together to protect their homes and businesses. Clean-up operations united strangers, and online initiatives sought to bridge divides, demonstrating that even in the darkest times, unity and compassion could prevail. The story of Mark Duggan and the England Riots is a pivotal part of British history, a stark reminder of the simmering tensions that lie beneath our societies and the urgent need for systematic change. It beckons us to question, reflect and act to ensure that such an event never repeats. As we move forward, it is essential to remember and learn from these events. They serve as a catalyst for change and dialogue, whether it's regarding police reform, racial justice, social economic equalities, or community coercion. It's this conversation, sometimes uncomfortable, often challenging, but always necessary, that will propel us towards a more fairer and equitable society. Engaging with this history isn't just about recounting the past, It's about paving a way forward for the future, where all citizens feel safe, respected and heard. The shooting of Mark Duggan and the 2011 England Riots offer a powerful lesson and an opportunity for us to do better, and we owe it to ourselves and future generations to heed them.